Hello everyone. I am your dark narrator here to guide you today. I know many of you use this video to help you drift off to sleep, but before you do, please like the video and subscribe to the channel. Also drop a comment letting us know where you're from and what time you're watching. Now settle in, get comfortable, and relax. Hello everyone. I am the Midnight Narrator and I am here today to help you. I know you are using this video to fall asleep, so before we begin, give the video a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel. Write in the comments where you're from and what time you're watching this. Now get comfortable and relax. Comfortable. My grandmother died a few weeks back at the ripe old age of 85, passing away peacefully in her sleep. By all accounts, she lived a damn good life, and I tried my very best to make it so. Lord knows she did the same for me. This has been a difficult post for me to write. You see, when a treasured loved one dies, especially one that you grew up with, the little solar system of your life is thrown completely out of orbit. Not that mine was ever all that stable in the first place. My parents died in a car accident when I was 2 years old, and I was a little too young at the time to fully absorb the emotional impact of being orphaned. When the prospect of being put into the foster system was brought up by the family lawyer, Grandma took me in without a second thought. Her home was our home. It's where I built my childhood. Honestly, you'd never meet a more charitable woman than my grandma. From the second I came into her life, all the way up to her death and even beyond, she's provided for me without fail. Another interesting thing about Grandma is the fact she was mute. I'm not talking about selective mutism here. I'm talking full-blown, constant silence. I've known that woman for my entire 32 years of life, and while I got used to it within a few months, to some it seems crazy that I never heard a word from her. Of course, we had our own ways of communicating back then. I picked up sign language pretty quickly, as kids tend to, and she always used to write on this little chalkboard for me. I thought it was awfully cute at the time. I got a call from her lawyer a few days after she passed, telling me she'd left her entire estate to me in her will. It doesn't matter how well you know a person, that kind of thing always hits you deep. Everything that wasn't covered by her donor card now belonged to me. A week or two passed, some papers were signed, and money changed hands. The wheels of bureaucracy turned slowly as ever, as my grandma's possessions became my possessions, and some eager patients became happy recipients of Grandma's remarkably healthy liver, kidneys, and lungs. Like I said, she was the giving type. The home was an old Georgian place. 2 stories, 3 bedrooms, and a well-maintained garden. I felt like a kid who just got a pony for Christmas. The problem was, I'm not a rich enough guy to pay the rent on an apartment and a house, and I'm not such a heartless bastard that I'd immediately sell my childhood home either, especially on this bipolar property market. I was speaking to a good friend of mine about it over a few drinks, and it was his idea to convert it into a rental property. I mulled it over when I was sober, of course, but my office job wasn't going anywhere, so I decided that being a landlord might be a welcome change of pace. That was when things started to go downhill. I showed up at the house with all my supplies on Monday, my car full of paint, tools, and industrial-strength bin bags. It took me a few minutes to gather the strength to go in at first. This house had a lot of history for me. Good times, bad times, like I said, this was where I grew up. And Grandma's death had made all the nostalgia taste bitter to me. The faster I did it, I kept telling myself, the less it would hurt. It's like ripping off a Band-Aid. The place had barely changed since I moved out at 21. It felt like a picture frozen in time, waiting for my return. I guess I granted its wish in that sense. It just didn't expect me to start tearing down the wallpaper. I was methodical, going from room to room, watching scenes from my childhood replay in the theater of the mind, before I started repainting and remodeling everything in sight. God, I forgot how ancient the place looked. Grandma's sense of style never really left the 70s. Once the first floor was bare and I'd dragged all the furniture onto the front lawn, my drinking buddies were suspiciously absent when I needed help with the heavy lifting. I had a break for lunch and did some exploring. The rooms upstairs were just like I remembered them. Grandma's room and the bed she'd never again sleep in was laid out neatly as ever. My room was just the same, covered in peeling Nirvana posters and bearing all the hallmarks of your garden variety edgy 90s teenager. When I left home, I told her to turn it into a games room, or a quiet room where she could read her books. Just something she could enjoy. I guess she never got around to it, or she expected me to come back someday. Tears were welling up in my eyes when I saw that her old chalkboard was lying on my bed with "Welcome Home" written on it. The one room I hadn't yet checked was the attic. Back when I was a kid, I was never allowed up there. Grandma said, or rather wrote, that it was too dangerous, so I stayed downstairs whenever she occasionally made her pilgrimage up the hallway stairs. But Grandma was dead and I'm an adult. I figured that if the attic was big enough, I could convert it into a loft room and take on another lodger. It'd be more income if I was right, so it felt almost stupid to miss out. Flashlight in hand, I made my way up the stairs into the attic. The bulbs up there were long since fucked, so my only source of light was the thin shard emitted by the flashlight. I'd never been a superstitious man, but something about the attic made me feel uneasy. Naturally, at first, I didn't see anything but old bags, boxes, and suitcases. I made a mental note to check those later, while I forged deeper into the surprisingly spacious attic. My eyes were on the money, and the chances of being able to install a room up here looked hopeful. Then a shape got caught in the beam of my flashlight, and I felt my heart skip a beat. It was shaped like a leg, a baby's leg, like it had been ripped from the socket. I rushed over to take a closer look and felt the greatest relief of my life when I realized it was plastic. Shortly after that, a second wave of creep set in, because what was a plastic baby leg doing in my grandma's attic? I picked it up and swept the area with my flashlight, until I caught something familiar in the corner. That didn't make it any less weird, though. There were dolls. Hundreds of fucking dolls. Big, small, old, new, expensive, cheap. From porcelain dolls to Barbie dolls to American Girl dolls to Cabbage Patch dolls. All various sizes, shapes, materials, and colors. I almost dropped the flashlight when I saw all their dead eyes glaring at me, thinking my grandma was the next Rose West, until I realized that they were all fake. They were arranged in a big pile like some kind of shrine. When my heartbeat had normalized again, I took a few steps closer, letting my flashlight cut through the gloom. So my grandma had been collecting these all these years and she never wanted me to see them? Not a bad call, actually. They made me feel uncomfortable then. God knows what I'd have thought of them 20 years earlier. While I'm sure they had a lot of sentimental value to my grandma, they sure as hell didn't have any to me. And I figured that no lodgers would want to stay in a home that seemed like some demented serial killer's person-sized dollhouse. They had to go, all of them. I fetched some of the bin bags from my car and started packing up some of the smaller ones, just chipping away at Mount, creepy bit by bit. The way Grandma had stacked them didn't even leave them all visible. It was dolls on top of dolls, each one just as horrible as the last. All except one. I found her lurking underneath the others, her face buried in the back of a tatty rag doll. It was like she didn't want to be seen, or that my grandma didn't want me to find her. She was bigger than the rest, about the size of a 4-year-old child, but with slightly off proportions. Her little, pinched-up face was molded from rubber and plastic, and her long, black hair looked like fiber-optic tubing. It's one of those things that's difficult to put into words, but something about her just repulsed me. Maybe it was those vacant blue eyes or the little silk dress that reminded me of those post-mortem photographs they took of children in the Victorian era. It all just felt eerie and wrong. Reaching out to touch her, the flashlight clenched between my teeth. Felt like I was reaching to grab a live tarantula. She was a lot heavier than I expected her to be. The torch glare revealed all the tiny scratches and imperfections in the plastic, making her look even uglier. Another thing I noticed when the light was shining directly on her face was that while her mouth was closed, the rubber on her tiny, lifelike lips wasn't sealed together. There was a black slit running between them. I have never felt as disgusted in my entire life as I did when those little lips twitched, like something was moving behind her dead face. My initial thoughts were animatronics, like those dolls designed to suckle on little bottles when you put them in their mouths. But this doll looked way too old for that kind of technology. So, being curious like a certain dead cat, I put my thumb on the doll's chin and gently slid open the mouth. In the darkness, something was stirring. The doll had a tongue, a human tongue, not just a severed piece of flesh rotting away in there, but a moving, wriggling, salivating tongue. It came bulging out past the lips, writhing lazily before licking at my thumb. It was hot, damp, and stank of cigarettes. I screamed, dropping the flashlight onto the ground, and hurled the doll at the wall. I bolted through the darkness on memory alone, knocking over boxes and leaping over suitcases before tumbling down the stairs in panic. I must have cleared the second floor faster than any human being alive and sprang through the front door of the house, never looking back. The front door was open and the lawn was still covered in furniture, but I didn't care. The home was out of the way anyway. If people made the effort to come down here, they could take what they like. Fuck that doll. Fuck that house. I jammed the keys into the ignition and took off like a gunshot, leaving the neighborhood at 3 times the legal speed limit. It must sound crazy now, I know, but logic was the furthest thing from my mind. I tore my way home at 80 miles an hour and didn't feel safe until I was in my flat. The door slammed and locked behind me. I was hyperventilating for a little while. I threw up once, almost fainted twice. At the time, I tried to justify it, assuming that maybe it was the fumes from all that cheap paint making me see things, making me a little kooky. I'd been under so much stress lately, I'd gotten so little sleep, it's no wonder I'm imagining such ridiculous things. Fear is exhausting. It takes a physical toll on you. Once the initial shockwaves had passed, I couldn't think about anything but sleep. God, I was so tired I could barely stand. Moments later, I collapsed into bed, fully clothed. I was asleep before I even realized. Sleep wasn't much of a reprieve. I kept dreaming about that terrible doll crawling over my paralyzed body like a spider, dragging its warm, stinking tongue across my face. No matter how hard I tried, there was no pushing it from my mind. Its little blue eyes were branded into my thoughts. When I woke up the next morning, I felt like I'd taken a 12-gauge blast to the face. My head throbbed, my skin burned. I just felt so itchy all over, like my bed had been swarming with fire ants. Over time, the itches became more localized. When I realized that I could feel it definitively on my forearm, I peeled back my sleeve to take a look. There was a patch of skin that had gone hard and smooth, and I mean rigid, rock solid. It had an almost reflective quality to it where all the hair had somehow fallen out. The skin around it itched like hell, but when I went to touch the patch itself, I didn't feel anything. I found more of these patches on my body when I inspected myself in the bathroom mirror. Those hard, reflective, feelingless patches. There was one on my inner thigh, one on my belly, 2 on my chest, and another on my left bicep. When I tried to peel one of the patches away, it just started bleeding. The patches weren't growing on my skin. The patches were my skin. The next day, I had an appointment with my local GP about the issue. I stripped off in his office, letting him see the patches. A few more had grown on my legs since last time. And worst of all, he seemed equally baffled. I must admit these are really quite extraordinary circumstances, he said, while trying and failing to cross-reference my symptoms against known diseases on the medical database. I can't say I've personally seen anything like this before. Please, doctor, I pleaded with him, trying my best to stop myself from itching at the patches. There's got to be something you can do for me. Something you can give me, maybe, like pills or an ointment. He'd fallen silent, reading more small type from the screen of his computer. Well, I can book you an appointment with a dermatologist. Great, when's the soonest he can see me? Not until next week, I'm afraid. Next week? But doctor, I can't wait until next week. I'm afraid he doesn't have any appointments prior to Wednesday of next week. If you feel as though it escalates severely before then, contact A&E through the standard emergency number and the hospital will take care of you as best they can. I'm sorry, this is all I can offer. Things got worse after that. I penciled my date with the dermatologist onto my kitchen wall calendar, but my skin condition was worsening. The patches were covering at least a third of my body by Wednesday. They'd grown on my legs, my arms, my ass, my back, my chest, my stomach, and they were even starting to grow on my face. I couldn't go into a well-lit room without patches of my skin shining. It all came to a head on Wednesday night as I stood before the bathroom mirror. A patch of shiny, hard skin was beginning to grow on my cheek, making it harder to move my face. I picked at the ragged edges of soft skin, wincing in pain while I did so, until I noticed a piece of loose skin sticking out from my face, just on the edge of the patch. I grabbed it between my thumb and forefinger and started pulling, and a long swath of translucent, soft skin peeled away from my face, revealing more rigid, reflective skin underneath. A few seconds later, I vomited into the bathroom sink. This was the last straw. It pushed me over the edge. The floodgates of rationality gave way to maddening truth. It was all that fucking doll. I had to put a stop to it. I had to know what the hell was going on with me. I got into the car with a kitchen knife slid into my belt and started driving towards Grandma's house. It was foggy out, low visibility, real horror movie weather. I was too angry to be afraid, too shocked to be uneasy. Soon there was going to be more of that awful plastic skin than there was real skin. I'd look like some perverse shop window mannequin. The furniture was still all over the front garden when I arrived. The front door was still wide open. Nothing had been touched. Frozen. A picture. Waiting just for me. I have to do it fast, I thought. If I do it fast, it'll hurt less, like ripping off a Band-Aid. Christ, déjà vu. I stormed through the front door and barged upstairs, knife in one hand and flashlight in the other. My footsteps slowed as I trudged through the second floor towards the attic stairs. The fear and trepidation was setting in. It felt palpable, like it was squeezing me. Or maybe that was just my skin. The attic, like everything else, was just the same as I left it. The bastard doll was still there too. I could see it very faintly. Its face to the ground, its body crumpled in the corner where I threw it. Where it belonged. I held the flashlight in my teeth again and headed over to the doll, remembering its bizarre weight. I grabbed it by the scruff of its dirty silk dress and yanked it up into my arms. Once again, the harsh light was shining directly into the doll's face. Oh dear God, the doll, it was covered in patches of skin, my soft pink skin. Some were sporadic, some were close together, but what was unmistakable was that the doll was somehow growing new skin, growing my skin, while the skin on my body turned to rigid plastic. I dropped the doll and stumbled backwards, the knife clinking to the floor and flashlight rolling off, casting errant shadows on the wall. My skin was on fire again. My head was spinning. I vomited onto the ground and clung against a wall, trying to steady myself in a world that didn't make sense anymore. Just then, my phone buzzed in my pocket, resurrecting me from my trance. I pulled it out of my pocket with a trembling hand and pressed the answer button before holding it against my ear. Hello? This is Dr. Samsa speaking. I know you don't know me, and I'm sorry to call from home, but I'm one of the doctors who performed the post-mortem hepatectomy on your grandmother last week. I wasn't going to call, but something about it has been bothering me recently. What? I replied in a monotone voice, barely in this world. Your grandmother, she was nonverbal, wasn't she? Yeah. When did she have the prosthetic fitted? This jogged me from the haze. I'm sorry, prosthetic. I don't follow. Her prosthetic tongue, sir. My blood ran cold. What? Her prosthetic tongue. I wasn't even aware such a thing existed, in all honesty. It appeared to be polymer-based, but it was so perfectly fused to the tissue in her lower jaw that it didn't seem like any old replacement part. Perhaps some kind of bonding agent was used that... I dropped the phone while the doctor rambled on. He was wrong, of course, but he'd given me the final piece of this whole insane puzzle. Yes, it all made sense after that. When you touch the doll, it takes things from you. It took my grandmother's tongue a long time ago, and now it's taking my skin. I can't imagine we were the first. There were some donors out there somewhere that made the doll that heavy. I walked from the attic, silent, almost catatonic, and sat in my car. I didn't move for quite some time, and in the sideways glances I made towards the house, I could have sworn I saw the doll at one of the second-story windows, staring down at me. But who knows, the mind plays all kinds of tricks. Time is short. I'm running out of skin. Thankfully, my fingers have lasted this long, but I don't expect them to be here much longer. It's only a matter of time before I'm a prisoner of my skin. The doll's out there now, somewhere, just a leaf in the wind. If that somewhere is near you, I hope to God you don't touch it. Because the last time I saw it, it still needed plenty of parts. Growing up, Christmas was magical. The tree glowing softly in the corner, the smell of gingerbread wafting through the house, and the laughter of my family made it feel like nothing could ever go wrong. But there was one tradition that always felt off. Every Christmas Eve, just before bed, my parents would gather us around the fireplace. They'd turn off all the lights except for the glow of the fire and hand each of us a small bell. "Shake it once for Santa," Dad would say with a smile. "He needs to hear you." So we did. We'd each shake our bells in unison, filling the room with soft jingling, and then my parents would blow out the fire. And that was it. When I was young, I never thought twice about it. But as I got older, I started to notice strange things. The next morning, the fire would always be relit, even though no one got up to do it. There were faint charred handprints on the bricks surrounding the fireplace. One year, when I was about 12, I asked my mom why we did it. Her face turned pale. "It's just tradition," she said, brushing me off. But that answer wasn't enough. Last Christmas, I decided to stay up. I was 16 and too curious for my own good. My parents and little brother had gone to bed. The house was silent and the fire had been snuffed out. I sat in the dark, the faint scent of smoke lingering in the air, waiting. At first, nothing happened. I almost gave up and went to bed. Then I heard it, a faint jingling like someone shaking a bell far off in the distance. I froze. The sound grew louder, closer until it was coming from the chimney itself. I held my breath, staring at the dark opening, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst. Something moved. I didn't see it at first, but I felt it. The cold draft that followed as a tall, gaunt figure emerged from the chimney. Its limbs were unnaturally long, its head bent to fit under the low ceiling. Its skin was ashen, flaking with dark burns trailing up its arms, and it was holding a bell. It raised the bell slowly and shook it once, the sound sharp and clear in the silent room. I couldn't move. Its head turned toward me, hollow eyes boring into mine. A jagged smile spread across its face as it whispered in a voice that sounded like crackling fire. "You're not supposed to watch." The room went black. I woke up in my bed the next morning, trembling, my clothes reeking of smoke. My parents acted like nothing had happened, but when I went downstairs, I saw a fresh set of charred handprints on the fireplace, and a bell sitting on the mantel. I haven't shaken a bell since, but every Christmas Eve I hear it, and every year it gets louder. I'm fine, okay? Finally, Human Resources seems to believe me. They're interviewed me a bunch of times, the police too, about what happened that night, Jack's last evening at our workplace, or anywhere else, seems like. And HR is convinced I won't be suing them. Why should I? Nothing happened, okay? I'm fine. And I have no idea where Jack, my former coworker, is. I'll tell you exactly what happened that evening. I'll even go back from the first time I laid eyes on Jack, right in this office. He was a new hire, and we had one of those god-awful icebreakers where we were paired and had to tell something about ourselves that the other could never guess. I trotted out my fail-safe line first. I went bungee jumping for my 20th birthday. Jack smiled politely without showing any teeth. Really? Cool, I'm a werewolf. I have many years of experience in people-oriented positions, and my decorum did not falter. Interesting. Do you go to Comic-Con? I've heard our city has one of the biggest in the region. Jack drew his eyebrows together, which I couldn't help noticing were somewhat thicker and bushier than normal. "I don't cosplay. I'm a real werewolf," he replied. I didn't know what to say. Fortunately, the facilitator called out, "Okay, everyone, time's up. Let's get into groups." We had to work together a lot. Towards the end of one meeting, as we closed their laptops and wheeled our chairs back from the workstation, I remarked idly that I hoped we have good weather for the weekend. Honestly, I turn when the moon is full regardless of weather. The clouds make no difference. I felt like dying. I gripped my laptop and looked away. Jack continued, "Although the hunt is easier on cloudy nights." He was standing with his back to me, staring out of the tall office windows. I mumbled something, can't remember what, and fled the room. Next month I was again sequestered with him in one of the top-floor meeting rooms. I told myself if he made another werewolf reference, I would email HR. It was weird and had no place in professional engagements, but the meeting went very well and I found myself warming to him. He was certainly competent. Towards the end, we were chatting like old friends and stepped in the elevator together. The elevator just started the long descent when it jolted horribly and ground to a halt. We stared at each other, and once again I couldn't help noticing the bushiness around his eyebrows and forehead, which before had seemed to conceal what I caught only now, a yellowish tinge in his eyes. I slumped back in a corner. My heart was racing. Soon a voice crackled through the intercom. Help was on the way, but there was a shortage of the parts needed, and it was rush hour. We had to brace ourselves for several hours of waiting. We remained mostly silent. There was nothing to be said. I think I dozed off, then jerked awake, my body aching horribly. I glanced at my phone on 1%. It was 11:32 p.m. Jack spoke. "You know I'm going to turn at midnight?" I raised my head. I knew I should feel frightened, but my main emotion was extreme fatigue. "Will you kill me?" Jack shrugged. "I haven't eaten for hours. I'm hungry, but I don't typically hunt humans." Tears welled out of my eyes despite myself. I could feel them, scalding hot it seemed, rolling down my face. Please, Jack, I have family. Jack said nothing. At 12:12 a.m., the workmen opened the elevator door, raising their flashlights. I shielded my eyes from the blinding light. A big, bounding creature knocked them over, a shadow heading straight for the stairwells. I staggered to my feet. The workmen rose too and laid their eyes on me, alone in the elevator, disheveled and filthy. But I was calm. I don't know what happened to Jack, who was never seen at that office ever again. Now leave me alone. I have a group of new hires who aren't going to orient themselves. I didn't expect to rush a fraternity. Coming from a small town, I had always seen Greek life as a bit of a cliché. Drunken parties, exclusive cliques, and a lot of posturing. But when I arrived at college, I found myself wanting more. I wanted to feel like I belonged somewhere. I wanted to be part of something bigger. That's when I heard about them. The fraternity everyone whispered about. Popular, well-connected, with a reputation for being a little more elite than the others. They didn't need to advertise. You either knew about them or you didn't. The guys were charismatic and welcoming, and when they invited me to rush, I figured, why not? The first few days were exactly what you'd expect from a rush week. Icebreakers, meet and greets, parties with too much alcohol, and promises of a brotherhood that would last a lifetime. The guys in the frat were exactly as I imagined. Charming, confident, funny. They threw the best parties, no doubt about it. The house was massive, one of those old, well-maintained mansions with high ceilings and rooms filled with antique furniture. It had character, and everyone in it seemed to belong. Jason, the president, was the first brother I met. He was charismatic, almost too much so. You couldn't help but feel like you were the most important person in the room when he spoke to you. He greeted me with a handshake that felt more like a seal of approval than a casual greeting. "You'll fit in great here," he said, flashing a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. But I brushed it off. I was just overthinking it. This was college. Everyone was trying to make a good impression. The parties were incredible. Drinks flowed freely, the music was loud, and the vibe was electric. I started to see why people loved being a part of this fraternity. It wasn't just about the parties. There was something about the atmosphere. The sense that you were in on something exclusive. Something that not everyone could access. It felt like a secret society, and I was finally being let in. It wasn't until I was extended a bid that things began to feel strange. The first night after I was officially a pledge, I went to the house for a welcome to the brotherhood party. It was just the pledges and the brothers this time. No outside guests. I'd been looking forward to it, excited to start my journey into fraternity life. But the vibe was different this time. The music was still loud, the drinks still flowing, but there was an edge to it, like everyone was a little too tense, a little too eager. I started to notice that the brothers were acting strange. They were still the same guys, but there was something in their eyes, something in the way they looked at me, like they were waiting for something, watching me, expecting something. Every time I spoke to one of them, they'd smile a little too wide or laugh a little too hard, like they were testing me. After a few hours, the party began to die down. The guests slowly filtered out, leaving just the brothers and the pledges. The house felt quieter, emptier. It was like the energy had shifted. I went to the kitchen to grab another drink and noticed a few of the brothers whispering in a corner, their voices low, hushed. I couldn't make out what they were saying, but it didn't seem normal. When I looked around the house, everything felt off. The hallways were darker now. The rooms seemed further apart, like the house was stretching as I moved through it. I had to shake off the feeling, remind myself that this was just my mind playing tricks on me. Then came the first strange noise. It happened when everyone was winding down, sitting around the living room talking in small groups. I was in the kitchen again, leaning against the counter when I heard a loud bang, followed by muffled shouting. It sounded like it came from the farthest room down the hall, a room I had never seen open before. I hesitated. I didn't want to seem nosy, but curiosity got the better of me. I walked down the hall, my steps slow, cautious. The door to the room was closed, locked. I could feel the sound of movement inside, like someone was pacing back and forth, scraping something against the walls. But when I tried the handle, it wouldn't budge. It was like the room didn't want me to open it. I stepped back, unsure of what to do. The noise stopped as suddenly as it had started, and a few moments later I heard footsteps approaching from behind me. Jason appeared at the end of the hall, his smile wide and his eyes cold. but it was the way he looked at me that made me feel like I was being watched, analyzed. "Everything okay?" he asked, his voice too smooth. "Yeah, just thought I heard something," I said, trying to sound casual. Jason laughed, clapping me on the shoulder with a force that made me stumble slightly. "The house is old, man. It makes noises. You get used to it after a while." He paused, glancing back at the door. "Just don't go in there. It's off limits for a reason." I nodded, but his words stuck with me. "Don't go in there." There was something about the way he said it, like it was a rule that wasn't just about the house, but something else, something unspoken. The parties continued as usual. On the surface, everything seemed normal. But the more I spent time in the house, the more I noticed things that didn't sit right with me. The brothers always seemed to be in groups, never alone. When they talked to me, they asked questions that didn't make sense. Questions about my past, about my family, about my deepest fears. They weren't trying to get to know me. It felt like they were testing me, probing to see if I was ready for something. The locked room, the one with the strange noises, remained off limits. Every time I passed it, I could hear things. Sometimes it was shouting. Sometimes it was whispers, sometimes just scratching, like something was trying to get out. I asked a few of the other pledges about it, but they all gave me the same answer. "Don't worry about it. You'll find out soon enough." That was the most unsettling part of it all. They didn't seem curious about the room, didn't seem bothered by it. It was just accepted. A week before Hell Night, things took a turn. The brothers called us together, all the pledges, and gave us a rundown of what to expect during Hell Week. It wasn't anything extreme, not like some of the horror stories I'd heard from other frats. But still, I felt this unease hanging in the air. It was almost like a collective tension, like everyone knew something was coming. Jason explained it casually, as though it were just another part of the process. Hell Week and Hell Night are important. It's about proving you're ready to join the Brotherhood. Don't worry, it's not going to be anything crazy. I wanted to believe him, I really did. But his smile, that tight smile, didn't make me feel reassured. It made my stomach turn. "You'll do a few challenges, push yourself a little, maybe some stuff you're not expecting," he continued almost too casually. "It's all part of the tradition. Just remember to stay calm, stay focused, and don't freak out." I looked around the room, at the other 15 or so remaining pledges. Some of them were grinning nervously, others just staring blankly, as though they had already seen the things we'd be doing. Jason's tone had remained light, but something about the way he said "don't freak out" made my skin crawl. Later that night, the brothers gathered us for the first round of hazing. It was subtle at first. They made us do things like walk through dark hallways blindfolded, test our limits with small discomforts. But it wasn't the tasks themselves that unsettled me. It was the atmosphere in the house, the silence between the challenges, the strange way the brothers watched us, always standing in groups, never speaking to one another directly, as though communicating in ways we couldn't understand. We were told to be ready for more on Hell Night. They made it sound like a joke, nothing we couldn't handle, but the tension in the air was thick. I'm sitting in my dorm room now, trying to convince myself that it'll be fine, that Hell Night will be just like any other college tradition, uncomfortable, maybe a little weird, but nothing dangerous. Nothing that's going to change the way I see the brothers or the house. But I know deep down that I'm lying to myself. Hell Night is coming, and I'm starting to think I'm not ready for what they have planned. As I stood in the almost empty classroom with only 2 other students, I realized that signing up randomly for whichever course was available might not have been my best choice. But, well, I didn't have much of a choice anyway. I scoffed at myself. 6 months, just 6 months of this, and I could switch to something else. My mood lightened at the thought of the pizza waiting for me that night. As I stood there, the door opened and a man walked in. He was well dressed, with long curls cascading to his shoulders and a face so striking it was almost otherworldly. I hadn't seen anyone so beautiful in years. The sight of him stunned me. Without saying a word, he picked up a broken piece of chalk and wrote on the board, "Nice to meet you all. I'm Ron, your sculpting teacher." I blinked, startled. Teacher? For a moment I thought he was a model or an artist on display himself. The other 2 students seemed unimpressed, sighing heavily, clearly disinterested. After the brief introduction, the class started. But it wasn't what I expected. Instead of working on anything hands-on, Ron played a video about the basics of sculpting and remained silent the entire time. I spent more time looking at him than at the video. After the class, I learned the other two students were dropping out. I considered doing the same, but something about the quiet intrigue of the class and Ron made me decide to stay. A part of me felt bad for him too. If no one else stayed, would he lose the job? The next day, I was the only one in the classroom. It felt oddly intimate, the silence heavier than before. Ron walked up to me and handed me a piece of paper. "Are you sure you want to continue this class?" I smirked, thinking it was a test, but then realized he couldn't speak. The knowledge hit me harder than it should have, and I immediately felt guilty for smirking. I nodded and said, "Yes," half out of genuine interest, half out of pity. His eyes lingered on mine for a moment before he walked to the front and began the lesson. For weeks, it was just the two of us. He communicated only through notes, his instructions simple yet cryptic. My sculptures turned out strange, abstract forms that seemed to emerge from a place I didn't fully understand. They were detailed, almost grotesquely so, with expressions that felt too real. I didn't question it at first. Art is meant to evoke emotion, after all. One night after class, something changed. I lingered, examining the pieces I'd worked on. They felt alive in a way that made my skin crawl. The lights flickered and the room seemed to shift. Shadows danced unnaturally on the walls, and I swore I heard whispers. Then on the chalkboard, a message appeared, scratched in jagged letters. "Sculpt me." I stumbled back, my tools clattering to the floor. The sculptures around me seemed to move, just slightly, but enough to make my blood run cold. I bolted for the door, but it wouldn't budge. The whispers grew louder, almost deafening, until the lights snapped off completely. In the darkness, I felt them, cold, stone-like hands brushing against me. The sound of grinding stone filled the air, and then a voice, Ron's voice, whispered directly into my mind. "Create. Me." The lights flickered back on, and everything was normal again. The sculptures were in their original places, and Ron walked in, his usual silent demeanor intact. He handed me another note. "Are you all right? You look pale. We'll end class early today. You don't seem well." I nodded, too shaken to argue. Outside the classroom, I noticed a poster on the notice board. It bore Ron's name and advertised an upcoming sculpting exhibition. Was it the same Ron? The description was vague, but it seemed likely. The next day, I went to the exhibition curious. The gallery was packed, the crowd buzzing with admiration for the sculptures on display. Each piece was hauntingly lifelike. A man mid-scream, a child crouched in fear, a woman crying bloody tears. The detail was astonishing, almost unsettling. Then I saw him, Ron. He was nothing like the reserved, quiet figure from class. Here he was a star, surrounded by admirers, exuding charisma. I was shocked. He never once mentioned being so famous. One piece in particular caught my eye, a sculpture of a woman crying bloody tears. The sorrow and fear etched into her face were so vivid, I felt compelled to touch it. My fingers brushed against its surface. It was warm. Before I could react, the figure crumbled under my touch. It wasn't stone. Flesh and blood spilled onto the floor, and the smell of decay filled the air. I stumbled back, horror clawing at my throat. Then everything went black. I woke up to darkness, my body stiff and cold. I tried to move, but I couldn't. My limbs refused to obey me. My chest burned and panic set in. I could see faintly. The stage of the gallery, the dim lights casting shadows over a new centerpiece. It took me a moment to realize the centerpiece was me. I was frozen in place, my body contorted into a macabre pose. My hands reached out as if pleading, my face twisted in terror. The spectators marveled at my realism, their voices muffled in my ears. "Truly haunting," someone said. "A tragic masterpiece," another murmured. I wanted to scream, to beg for help, but I couldn't. Ron appeared beside me, smiling faintly. He leaned in close, his voice soft and cold. "Welcome to eternity." Another year and it's almost time. Christmas is almost upon us, and before that, Christmas Eve. Everyone has their own holiday traditions. In my hometown, we have our own as well. These traditions are observed every year without fail. Not just because it is tradition, but because if we did not, something bad would happen. The small township I live in lies in a sparsely populated area of the old country. I will not disclose where to keep everyone else safe from trying to investigate around this time of year. But it is a beautiful and idyllic town 364 days a year. It is just one day that we have to prepare for. That day is Christmas Eve. The town's records do not give us much insight on when exactly it started. The Blight, as it was called, began around 150 years ago. Every year since then, terrible things would happen the night of Christmas Eve, and then disappear the morning of Christmas. The toll that would be reaped on the town was devastating. Many people left, and those that could not or would not began the tradition that we uphold even to this day. The tradition is called the Vigil. My role in this tradition is to play the part of a watcher. It is a role most of the able-bodied people in the town have. The watchers hold the Christmas Eve vigil and guard the members of the town who try to hide from the nightmare that ensues. What we watch for, well, that is the disturbing part. The things that come out at night are some form of creature. They never show themselves at any time other than that one night every year. But on Christmas Eve, they are drawn to us somehow, and they are not peaceful. Fortunately, they are not indestructible, and we have successfully killed many in the years that we have had to defend the town. However, all we have learned about them was paid for in blood. No attempt to capture one has been successful, and the bodies of the slain decompose and dissolve before by daybreak. Thinking about the things I have seen in past years makes me shudder. I try and prepare myself for tomorrow. As I think about how to prepare for the next few hours, I find myself remembering the horrible night last year. A night where the Blight cost us all dearly, and one that makes me fear that they are getting worse each year now, and we may not be able to hold out forever. Last year's vigil began as they often did. The watchers would take our families to the church in the center of town, then make sure our family and friends were properly secured. Lastly, we would exit the relative safety of the church and move to the perimeter of the town and wait for nightfall. I remember leaving home with Sally and the girls. Sally and I spared them the worst of the details of what really happened at night on Christmas Eve, but we did have to stress the very real danger. Most children had to be kept secure in the warded basement of the church. It at least had some means of supernatural defense against the things. A strict curfew was in place as well to prevent any stragglers from being subjected to the things the Blight had in store for us. Just as we were leaving, I saw my brother Jason heading to the church as well. I greeted him. We all continued out into the cold night. A gentle snow had started to fall, and we knew it was going to be a long one. We moved into the once bustling town center, and everything was already eerily quiet. The streets were empty, and the only sound that could be heard was the soft crunch of snow underfoot. In the center of town stood the old church looming above us, its steeple reaching towards the dark sky. Hopefully all of the townsfolk would seek refuge when the time came. Some refused to leave their homes, and we tried to cover as much area as we could, but we could not be everywhere at once. The people knew what was coming, and most knew there was only one place that could offer them any semblance of safety. Inside the church, the pews were filled with people huddled together, clutching each other tightly. The fear in their eyes was palpable, and the only reassurance they had was the heavy wooden doors that stood between them and the outside world. Jason and I said our goodbyes and goodnights to our families and prayed we would see them again at dawn on Christmas Day. We left the church, and I remembered to place a large red bow on the door to the church. For some reason, this helped keep the weakest ones out. The larger ones, though, well, we had to look out for those most of all. Jason and I arrived at the outskirts lookout around 10 p.m. Our group of about 20 watchers waited in silence for the events to unfold. I gripped my homemade spear tightly in my hand. We had to rely on very specific weapons to combat the unique threat posed to us each year. For some reason, modern weapons would not affect the horrors that stalked the village. Only fire or weapons made out of the wood of evergreen trees could wound or kill the things. At around 11 p.m., we saw movement near the outskirts, and we knew they had arrived. Jason called out to all of us, looking out toward the edge of the forest by where we had set up the signal lights. He lowered the binoculars as he spoke. "We have Grinches." We knew what that meant, and we raised the spiked palisade barrier and prepared our spears. They shambled through the small field separating the watchpost from the forest's edge. The first several walked right into the spiked palisade and died impaled and clueless. The rest weaved through the gaps in the barricades like water breaking around and over a boulder in a river. They came on, and we struck out at them with a successful charge of our own. The first wave was slaughtered, but there were many more that slowly marched towards us. A rank smell emanated from them, and I thought that the name we gave them was apt, since these small creatures were very mean ones indeed. They were violent and gross, smelling like death, and despite the plodding pace they moved at, they could suddenly enter a frenzied state and rip someone apart in a matter of moments. Another larger group attacked us shortly after the first, and 3 got past the line of spears and went berserk. We stopped them before things got too bad, but it was already getting ugly. We managed to put down the rest of the Grinches, and only Charles and Abner had been injured, though their wounds would need to be sterilized promptly as the vile claws of the Grinches would quickly cause an infection. The injured men were treated, and we were all surprised a larger wave of foes did not show up. The previous year, we battled for over an hour before the Grinches were diminished enough to stop attacking. Something felt off this time. Then to my horror, I saw Grayson's body turn to ice in an instant, then shatter into thousands of pieces. It was my turn to shout a warning, and I screamed at my comrades, "Frost fiends!" We shouldered our spears or put them down and lit out torches. There were even a few of us lucky enough to have brought aerosol flamethrowers. The Grinch's attack was over, but a new wave of creatures burst out of the thin layer of snow forming on the ground around us. These were the frost fiends, or frosties as we sometimes called them. They were humanoid figures with icy blue skin and razor-sharp claws. They moved with an otherworldly grace, their eyes glowing with an ethereal light. Though they could eviscerate us with the icy talons they possessed, they were uniquely deadly for their ability to turn unprotected people into ice. Only holding a torch or being near fire seemed to keep them from freezing us. The other watchers paused in both shock and terror over Grayson's sudden death and the appearance of 3 frosties at once. Normally we might see a single freezing killer in our midst, but 3 at one time was very bad news. Before we could blink, the frosties were moving, and Charles and Abner, who had just been patched up after the fight with the Grinches, were swiftly decapitated by the impossibly fast monsters. Jason grabbed the aerosol spray and the lighter and took aim. A frost fiend that was rushing towards us let loose a terrible shriek as the jet of fire engulfed it and quickly melted its frozen body to a puddle of steaming water. The other 2 were already moving, trying to slay the source of the hated flame. I lunged forward, covering my brother with my torch, and I managed to push the flaming end into the freezing form of one of the fiends. It was burned but remained in one piece and rushed at me. Byron jumped at the thing and slammed his own torch into it, and several other watchers followed suit. Eventually, the massed attacks reduced it to a puddle of liquid like its fellow. The rest of the watchers were being sorely pressed by the remaining fiend. It had killed 4 of them, and the other aerosol flame sprayer was somehow lost or broken. Jason and I managed to use the remaining flame sprayer to destroy the thing, but the damage had been done and our group of 20 watchers was reduced to 7. We saw another group of Grinches in the distance, and we were about to try and restore our position to ward them off when we heard something that made my heart sink. The bell at the church was ringing. How could it already be ringing? It was so early. The attacks had just begun and they were there already. The bell only rang when the church itself was under attack, and it was a signal that all watchers needed to pull back and focus on defending the church. Jason and I both looked at each other, panic plain on our faces as we thought of our families sheltering at the church. We gathered our spears and torches and returned to the church as fast as we could. The retreat was terrible, and we were harried by more creatures. We lost 2 additional comrades when we ran right into a large throng of Grinches. They sacrificed themselves so that we could escape. We heard the sounds of other watcher groups being torn apart, and the telltale of bodies being frozen and shattered. We finally arrived at the church and we saw what was happening and panicked. The reason they had moved into town and could attack the church so soon was the head of the horde was led by the worst of them all. It was a Krampus. We did not know if it was a single entity like the famous creature its namesake derives from, or if it was a particular species of monster that had more than one. Mercifully, only one ever seemed to show itself during these attacks, but one was enough. The thing was massive, and it possessed frightening strength and durability. Few ever reported successfully wounding the thing, and no one alive currently could boast of slaying one. Normally, a Krampus would not even show up most years. When they did the attack, it would be particularly terrible. It possesses the ability to drive the lesser creatures into a manic frenzy, and can command them as efficiently as any general. We were in very real trouble. No one I knew had faced one before, but I had heard that defeating it could cause all the other creatures to retreat, thus ending the attacks at least for that night. Not a theory I could put much stock in, since no one in this generation had successfully defeated one as far as I had heard. With the townsfolk barricaded in the church, Jason and I, along with 4 surviving watchers, faced the mountainous bulk of the terrible creature. We looked at each other, unsure of how to fight such a blasphemous titan. Zack broke ranks and charged the thing and threw his spear at it. The throw was good, but to our disbelief the Krampus caught the thrown spear, and then snapped it in half and discarded the broken parts. I swear I caught a glint of a smile on its horrible face. It snapped Zack up in its giant hands, and before we could stop it, it snapped him in half. Blood sprayed everywhere, and we all looked on in horror as the blood-soaked monster charged at us immediately after dispatching our friend. Jason pulled me aside as the monster bowled past us, narrowly tramping us. He told me urgently, "I have an idea. I need to lead him to the fuel storage." I looked back at him and my heart sank, and I replied, "No, you can't. There has to be another way." Jason smiled at me and just shook his head. I knew his plan and I could not make peace with it, yet I had no choice. The Krampus killed Robert just as Jason and I ran to the nearby fuel storage depot. There were massive amounts of kerosene and gasoline stored here for use in all of our flammable weapons and for other yearly practical purposes. I did not know we would need to use everything at once, but desperate times called for desperate measures. We baited the monster to follow us to the depot, and I was nearly crushed when the creature hurled a piece of a nearby building at me. Jason goaded the monster into following him into the fuel storage, and he spared one last glance at me, and I mouthed a silent goodbye as he lit the lighter he was still carrying. In the next moment, the entire building was turned into a fireball. My brother had sacrificed himself to save the town. True to tale as we had heard, the rest of the horde vanished early that night. The leader creature defeated, or at least temporarily stopped for that year. The flames raged for so long that not much was left to verify. No one could say for sure if the awful creature had burned up and perished, or if it could have somehow escaped. Jason received a posthumous award from the town council for his bravery as an example to all of the watch. What little that reminded of us that was. I still remember the fire and the sounds of the people being slaughtered by those nightmare creatures, and I fear for what is in store for us tomorrow. We have even less people this year as more have fled. Our fuel stockpiles are perilously low now as well, and it all seems hopeless. The attacks seem worse each year, and there are more and more calls to abandon the town entirely. Yet there is some strange force, maybe some spark of divine protection that holds a power that some of us know cannot fall into the hands of those creatures. So we stay and fight, and protect what is ours from the worsening blight. I will stay. I will honor my brother's memory and protect this town. The time is almost here and I must get ready. It will be another long night. Wherever you are in the world, stay safe and keep your families warm and safe tonight. Oh, and in case I do not make it to the 25th this year, Merry Christmas. It's a Wonderful Life started again on the big screen behind the bar. The beautiful woman's voice poured honey in my ears. Honey and insults. Deeply hurtful insults. You seem like a big loser. I think God might buy you trying to kill yourself. He's a sucker for suicides on Christmas Eve. Excuse me? The attractive woman, out of the league for every barfly present, including the retired and disgraced lawyers, sat at my corner table, and these were her immediate and rapid words. She seemed pretty excited. How'd you like to make $500 tonight? Of course you would. Her manicured fingernails, dark red, slipped deftly into her slightly exposed brazier and produced the elastic stack of mentioned cash. She dropped it like a microphone after a victorious rap battle right on the table, the paint-chipped table. The surface was carved with the initials of 3 generations of Lyle men, including me, the worst and least accomplished of a long line of bums, draft dodgers, and deadbeats, cowards and inadequate fathers. At least I wasn't that. I had no children. I had no wife. I had no family left on speaking terms but my mom. My only legacy would be this table at Sports Bar, a hole so dank it didn't bother with an original name. It didn't even play modern sports. There was one ancient TV, and the old bartender, I never knew his name but he knew mine, popped in VHS tapes of hockey from the 80s and 90s on repeat. Except on Christmas Eve, Jimmy Stewart mocked us with his desperation. He, George Bailey, the character Stewart played, had a wife, kids, a job. Yet he still thought about killing himself on Christmas Eve. Nobody here, none of us unfortunates, had anything on George Bailey. Especially not the courage to walk out into the snowy street and lie down in the path of the next snowplow. Born at the wrong time, said Beth, the aged prostitute. Still game if you are. Watching It's a Wonderful Life with intensity, like she hadn't been here since the morning and seen it half a dozen times. $20 for Beth, for you name it. I think she married the bartender years back. Neither seemed to remember. Merry Christmas, Beth, the bartender said. She glared at him and muttered curses into her mostly empty pint. The only reason I noticed their exchange at all came down to lighting. What's darker than dank but not total pitch? It's whatever shadows followed this lady around like an evil pool of fog. We sat in it, I breathed it in. I longed to be at the bar and in the muted glow of red and green string lights from a more innocent, less energy-efficient era. But the money. She'd picked the right guy. She knew her losers well. I touched the wad to see her reaction, of which there was none. $500, I said. She let me take it into the inside of my suit jacket, the one I always wore with my track pants. Both belonged to my father and his father before him. The suit jacket belonged to another time, and so it endured. The track pants were never used for anything athletic, so they endured. You have to kill someone, she said, and her perfect smile rekindled lust in a body too lazy to act on the most basic tasks. Sex, even the briefest and bad kind, had become a fantasy that brought on depression. I'd never found anybody. I never would. No one was coming. Nobody rescued Jimmy Lale. Okay. I drained the last half of my pint, and the old bartender came with another before my empty glass hit the table. My father drank his days away. My grandfather drowned his nightmares from a war he never attended. Here, this place, this exact table. Why the hell did I choose to sit here every goddamn time? Here you are, Jimmy, the old guy said. I nodded thanks, but kept my eyes on her. Wow, she said. You're a real creep and a pervert. I burped as my roving eye took in the shape of the impossible woman. No women came to Sports Bar, except Beth. But she was a prostitute, and possibly married, so maybe she didn't count. You came to me, I said, and in that dress. Why wear a low cut with such immaculate breasts if not to invite stares? And I kept looking. One can view a great work of art without jerking off. I shook my head. Listen, what do you want? You're going to the nearest bridge over water, she said, and you're going to jump. Won't that make it hard to spend my $500? My $500. You only get it if you jump. I think one of us is missing something here, I said. Give the money to someone you love, pay off what's likely a tremendous bar tab. Do something good with it to make up for a wasted life of selfish indulgences. The way she tilted her head and smiled made it reasonable. Her smile skipped the usual transitions to a cold and flat-lipped stare. Or keep this up for another year or so. Whatever time you have left. What are you? 50? 33, I said, remembering why I didn't sit at the bar. The mirror behind the liquor scared me. I didn't want to see the sad man there. I didn't want to know how bad I'd gotten. You have until midnight, she said. And the darkness relented because somehow she disappeared in it. The money and a heavy perfume almost covering an odor like rotten garbage were all that remained to prove the interaction had occurred. I didn't attribute the smell to her. It had to be me or any number of other pieces of humanity in the bar. The truth of the trash didn't come until later at the bridge. Auld Lang Syne, the song everyone slurs through at midnight on New Year's Eve, blared from the big screen. The bartender turned up the volume. George Bailey, black and white and astonished by the amount of people in a room who love him, picks up his daughter, Zuzu. A bell on the tinseled Christmas tree nearby rings for no reason. Look, Daddy, Zuzu says. Teacher says every time a bell rings, an angel gets his wings. That's right, her dad confirms. That's right. The movie ended, and we drunks were captured by the silence, drinking a little faster to save our feelings for the hangover. Beth started bawling. The bartender, maybe her husband, comforted her the only way he knew. A shot of something dark, potent. Her weeping quieted, her sadness marked only by the slight trembling of her shoulders as she buried her face into the folds of her wrinkled forearms. I stood up. The legs of the worn chair scraped against the painted hardwood. No one looked up. Hey, I said. It's Christmas soon. We ought to be celebrating. I felt the wad of money, but hesitated to pull it out of my coat. Not that the half-dozen other regulars, the strangers I drank with, noticed me. I've got $100. Let's all have a shot? A half-dozen grizzled chins, tired faces finally bent my way. The bartender clapped once. I paid for my beers with the unemployment checks I scammed and the under-the-table money I earned through odd jobs here and there. But some of these guys looked homeless. How did they pay? No matter. We shuffled to the bar. Shots of Crown Royal were poured and we drank them immediately in unison without a toast. I handed over $100 and turned to leave. 100 gone from 5. Had I really agreed to that woman's demands? 3 miles. The nearest bridge over water, a waterfall in fact. Jagged rocks and flat slabs of limestone below. A narrow but deep pool in the middle of all that instant death. A surprisingly strong grip seized my forearm. The sandpaper hand belonged to a mop of greasy gray hair with a pink-skinned man underneath. I knew your dad, his mustache seemed to say. And he was good too. All of the Lales are good. I felt disgusted. How could he say that? My dad spent his time drinking in sports bar while his wife and son watched TV late into the night, hoping just this once he'd come home. He never did. He got drunk and he stayed away. The school bully told me once he'd seen my dad sleeping in a doorway. He, the bully, didn't mock me or beat me up. He patted my shoulder and told me to hang in there. I tried to pull away, but the grip persisted. He drank, we all do. Why, ask yourself. Your daddy stayed away. Why? The gray mane let go. His shaky index finger scolded me. Ask yourself, Jimmy, Merry Christmas. He turned back to the bar and the drink. Merry Christmas, I said, but I don't think he heard me. Merry Christmas, everyone. I went for the door. No one replied or said goodbye. No one thanked me for the shots. The door to sports bar groaned on rusted hinges and clanged shut on a quiet street. I couldn't remember the last white Christmas in Bridal Veil Lake. Global warming had given us green holidays and barbecues into December. Not this year, though. A storm had rolled off the lake a few days back and dropped a heavy blanket. Christmas bulbs within snow, soft green and red and yellow. The picture of my childhood when I didn't understand the problems that haunted my dad. I still don't get it, but I know he passed them along like a tradition. A gift I opened every day and couldn't see clearly. An empty box except for the darkness it contained. Light trails of white dust slithered over the plow-impacted snowbanks. The sidewalks had been made into corridors. I shivered in my suit jacket. I didn't own a winter coat. Too expensive. Plus these bouts of weather were brief in the modern age. The temperature would swing wildly above freezing within a day or so. Then the pretty decorations would be set again in mud, litter, cigarette butts. Each step produced a small but satisfying crunch of powder beneath my sneaker. The southeast part of town had been zoned for factory residential about 100 years ago. The companies had long gone. They left rusting masses on barren tarmac. The vacuum of their absence tore at once thriving neighborhoods. Whole blocks were abandoned. Kentland Road, my street, had survived because of the buses to Tour Hill. Bridal Veil Lake adapted after the factories shuttered. Arcades and aquariums, wax museums and slots provided precarious employment, enough money to sustain an anorexic existence. I tried to focus on the lights, the very picturesque street. These houses were old, red bricks and more than the cookie-cutter vaults people called home in the suburbs. Despite it all, I loved this place. And yet my eyes lingered on every depressing detail I could find. A lost dog poster over 2 years old, the picture faded. The Need Food cardboard sign in Sharpie by the shuttered mall, left in the dirt near the thriving liquor store. A discarded novel by an author I'd never heard of, the pages swollen with moisture and frozen by the temperature dip of the night. All we do is plead with the universe to acknowledge us, to show us something. But nothing comes, nothing ever happens. The plea outlasts the beggar. Perhaps that's what it is to be human. Maybe desperation is our purpose and some creature gets high off the supply. These were not my usual ruminations post-sports bar. At first I blamed Christmas and the joy so many people were probably basking in while I staggered home. But then the voice in my head went off script and in a tone objectively alien. Yeah, the world is shit, it's bad. Find a bridge, find it now, come on. What do you have to live for, Jimmy? I turned around so fast I lost balance and stumbled sideways into the snowbank. Around the corner of the variety store, a velvet cape disappeared. Her cheap perfume lingered, and so too the stench of scarcely concealed filth. Whatever pitiful amount of courage I had was spent looking around the edge of the store. A homeless man wrapped in a new red blanket slept in a doorway. I didn't buy it. Not for a second. It had been her. Her dwindling stank in the frigid air told the truth. Leave me alone. I said against the wind, an immediate futility sapping the will to remain upright. The homeless man startled and flinched under the warm blanket. His dark eyes glittered. "I'm not your prop," he accused before rolling over again. "Sorry," I apologized. When I turned to go, I added, "I don't want the money." But I'd already taken it. $100 gone. A little more quickly, a little more sober than preferred, I walked the rest of the way home. Each blast of wind made me wince. I couldn't hear my own steps or if anyone followed. By the time I mounted the crooked stairs of my mom's wilted porch, I was trembling and could barely grasp the handle of the outer screen. My mom never locked the doors. I usually made a show of trying the keys first so I could chastise her while she watched TV and paid me no attention. I resented the pattern. On this Christmas Eve, however, I'd never been more grateful. Once inside, I shut and locked the screen and threw the bolt on the inside door. "What's the matter?" Mom said from the living room. My breathing came in short, frantic breaths. "Jimmy?" "It's a Wonderful Life" played across the flat screen set too high above the fireplace. Not again. Mom had built a rare fire for the occasion. I felt drawn to the flames. Frozen skin stung pleasantly in the heat. George Bailey defended his deceased father. "You're right when you say my father was no businessman, I know that, but neither you nor anyone else can say anything against his character." Mom put down her drink and snapped her fingers. "Hey Jimmy, what's happening? You get mugged?" I turned around slowly. The fire soothed my refrigerated backside. Mom appeared concerned. Small eyes knitted at the brows. Her lips peeled slightly to reveal smoker's teeth. Fear and anger made up this familiar expression. She always worried about me. Tooth and nail, she'd never failed to step up when she thought I got the short end. And why? I'd never done a thing to deserve her love, and I'd done a lot that deserved a booting out the door. She never asked for rent. Fed me. Knew about sports bar, but didn't give me shit about it. She cared about me more than I could ever care for myself. "Jimmy," she said, rocking forth from her chair in children's pajamas. Her small frame made it difficult to find adult clothes. The pants and button-up shirt had trains racing around her legs and arms and a bright light blasting from a tunnel in her torso. "You're freaking me out." I smiled. Pretty badass pajamas. "I got a job, Ma." Immediate suspicion cinched her eyelids. "A job? Tonight? What kind of job? With who?" She snatched up her gin. Who could blame her? I'd had plenty of jobs before. Nothing majorly bad. Stolen goods from Walmart needed to be stored until they could be sold online. I kept PlayStations and Xboxes under my bed for a small fee. Gotta keep a console too. I sold it. "Not like that," I said. Look, I got an advance already." I took out the $400. "Look." She chugged the gin and poured another from the glass decanter on the coffee table. "What's the job, Jimmy?" "I don't know." I lied poorly. "Uh-huh. Why are you telling me about it this time? What's different?" She snapped her fingers under my nose because I didn't answer fast enough. "It's different," I said, "because I won't get in trouble. It isn't illegal." "Wait, is it illegal to kill yourself? Couldn't be. Nobody to arrest but a corpse. And this money is for you." I held out the crisp bills for her to take. She shook her head and slid back into the recliner. Her gaze went through me to the TV and the movie. "Take it," I said, kneeling down at her feet. "It's for you, for all." Mom shushed me, raised a hand about to give me a slap, something she had never done. "Jimmy," she said, "I love you. From the moment you were born and I held you, I will always love you. You've made some poor choices and I never blamed you. God knows you weren't dealt the best hand. But this is the first time, the only time, Jimmy. You make me ashamed." I wished she had smacked me. I sat down on the hardwood and looked at the money in my lap. "It's for you. I didn't steal it. I'm going to earn it. I'm going right now. Honest work, Ma. Honest. Please take the money." "No." She lit a cigarette. "Please, I need you to take it. It's the only good thing I'll do." Tears came unexpectedly. I hadn't cried over anything since the age of 8 when I understood Dad would not be coming home. Mom cupped my cheek. "Jimmy, you don't need to. Give it back." I stood up. She followed. The top of her head reached only below my chin. I dropped the bills on her slippers and went for the door. "Jimmy, don't go." I ignored her. I closed the front door and locked it with my key, already aware that the panic from earlier had come from something unnatural outside. Was the beautiful woman lurking beyond the periphery? I think so. But with friends, many of her monstrous friends. The nearest bridge, Albion Falls, so easily forgotten in the shadow of the town's namesake, could be reached in an hour at walking speed. I had about 50 minutes until midnight. The thousands of eyes I couldn't see but feel from even the smallest pockets of darkness were waiting. If I didn't hold up my end of the bargain, if I wasn't over the railing before midnight, they were here for me. Running to avoid being murdered so that I could kill myself was ridiculous and maybe ironic. One would expect to avoid murderous creatures of the night to go on living. Not me. Not a Lyle man. As I passed from familiar neighborhoods to the relatively strange borders of the abandoned factories, I tripped over a buried train rail and ate shit on a storm drain. Huge clots of snow fell from the sky and stuck to my unshaven face. I checked the time. Only 15 minutes and far to go. Darker shades of black pushed against the light, constrained but barely by the agreement I had made with probably the devil. The hot devil. But the smell stank as ugly. Slipping across a patch of ice, tripping over buried curbs, I fled the growing masses of still unknown evil. The roadway bridge over Albion Falls discouraged tourists. There were no sidewalks and only a yellow guardrail up to the knees. A fall would likely be fatal. I had played in the gentle creek at the foot of the Albion as a child. It felt like a magical place, where fairies showered and treasures awaited behind the curtain of water. I always checked. Video games train players to look behind waterfalls. The perpetual disappointment of the empty hollow didn't dissuade me from the idea. Nope, I simply believed someone else had gotten there first. That I had lost the race. My childhood ended the second I stopped believing I would be first someday, that I would find the treasure. That there even was a treasure for people like me. No more. Exhausted, out of breath, with a fair stream of snot freezing in my mustache, I entered the pool of illumination offered by the one street light on the bridge. 15 minutes to spare. I looked down. Darkness. The world held an abundance of the stuff. In my head I knew the jagged death below, and the slim hope of the narrow deep somewhere in the middle. As far as I knew, nobody jumped from the bridge ever. Who knew if the rocks could be avoided? And why would I want that anyway? If I somehow survived, they would be upon me. I dared to look back as the last minutes depleted from this Christmas Eve. On the edges of the humble streetlight's offering gathered hundreds with yellow eyes trailing fiery streaks, like infernal fireflies whenever they moved. And move they did, practically vibrating with anticipation. So many of these evil things together produced a fetid heat that burned the snow into rolling streams of fog. A vapor wall came for me, and I did not want to breathe it in. I stepped over the guardrail. Eager creatures or not, I had no reason to stay. Even if Mom didn't keep the $400, my absence would make her rich in savings. The world would be a far better place without Jimmy Lale in it. Pointlessly, as if I could see anything below, I closed my eyes and began to lean forward. That's when I heard the splash, a watery thunk followed by loud bellowing. "Help! Help!" A collective nasty little snicker came from the group on the road. I ignored them. Hello? Is there... Help! I'm not sure what happened next exactly. Never in my life have I done anything heroic or even helpful that I can recall. Yet I searched for the childhood path down to the bottom of the falls. When found, I didn't hesitate, despite a near-total inability to see jack shit at all. Help! The call for aid grew fainter. A familiar slab of angled limestone said I only had to jump onto its horizontal twin to reach the bottom. I did, but slipped on the icy spray coating the rocks. Straight into the unseen pool, I bumped into the drowning man. He calmed immediately, and I dragged him onto the flat limestone with surprising ease. I'm not strong, he was light. We clung together as we negotiated our way back into the light, shivering uncontrollably. Those creatures were nowhere to be seen, and I half believed they'd never been there in the first place. The no longer drowning man, now illuminated, turned out to be chubby, red-faced, and balding. A Santa Claus if he'd shaved off his beard. "You okay?" he asked me. "Mr. What? You're not going to do it, are you?" "Do what?" "Jump." "Jump? How did you... Wait a second. You jumped from where?" He'd had to have been above me, higher on the bridge, to have landed in the pool. There is no structure above the roadway. It's like he fell out of the sky. "Where did you come from?" He smiled. "Heaven, Jimmy, I'm your guardian angel." Before I could say another word, a black streak whipped between us. Her perfume and the subtle rot clotted my nostrils. I wanted to be sick. The beautiful woman had him by the throat and off the ground. His feet dangled, and he couldn't breathe. "Well done, Jimmy," she said, and the interior of her eyes filled with blood. "Angel is the rarest delicacy for my kind. This is a true gift." "What's happening?" I shook violently. "You can go now," she said. "I doubt you'll want to see this." The sad eyes of the shaven Santa Claus looked shocked at the betrayal. After all, he'd leapt into the water to stop me from jumping. Just like the film. This couldn't be real. I wasn't George Bailey. "I can't," I explained to the old man. Despite his impending death, he smiled as if to say, "It's fine, Jimmy. Go on back to sports bar. Your mom?" $400, I began to weep. "Please, lady," I said. "Let him go. I'll jump. I'll do whatever. You can have me instead." She snickered and looked simultaneously revolted. "We're quite full of low-grade human blood, thank you. Probably get drunk off you." Fangs escaped her gums. She bared them, a warning, a promise. "Go, before I let them have you." She laughed. The monstrous shades appeared and closed a circle around the light. I could see more than their eyes. They were not beautiful like their master, and they did not hide the foul cloud emanating from their skin and salivating maws. Upright dogs and wolves caked in dried gore would be a fair general description. Though there were more unique oddities in the group, too many to name, too frightening to write. "You," I said, "can't have him." My voice broke like a prepubescent boy, which she found quite amusing. She tossed the feeble angel across the road. He slid in the layer of snow and bumped into the guardrail on the opposite side. "Jimmy," she said, "if you want to die by my hand, I'll oblige." Black claws stretched and curved and serrated from her fingertips, right before my eyes. The midnight church bell tolled, the waves of sound dismissing the disruptive wind as if the creative breath of God had poured forth angrily from his nostrils. Every creature sank low and laid their faces against the snow. Powerful, blinding light pulsed with the tolling. The beautiful woman finally became uncertain and quite perturbed as a fiery gladius blade exited where her black heart should be. The angel, no longer feeble but grown in stature, muscle, and beard, yes, a long flowing beard, unfurled marvelous golden white wings. "Every time a bell rings, bitch," he said to the dying vampire. The glamour fell. The perfume vanished. She looked a lot like the others, except larger in stature and with leathery wings under her hairy arms. Her body fell to pieces and twitched. Panicked eyes searched everywhere and popped out of decaying sockets, rolling away toward the rails, an escape attempt. They squashed rotted grapes under my sneakers. I slipped, but a strong hand caught my forearm and brought me back to level. We were alone on the bridge. The snow smelled fresh again, the world clean. Magic had returned to Christmas Eve. He smiled. The fiery sword evaporated. His wings diminished and faded from this veil of tears. The heavenly glow, the golden armor turned to sparks in the wind, carried away to the sky where they were indistinguishable from the stars. He kept the beard, though. In this more humble form, he took my hand and shook it. "Thanks, Jimmy." "Thanks, shouldn't I be? You saved me." He chuckled. "I jumped in the water to save you. You jumped in to stop that creature, proving you're not what you think you are." I wasn't used to praise. I tried to turn away, but his grip, still soft, couldn't be shaken. "What do I think I am?" He only raised his bushy white eyebrows. "A loser." But now you see, Jimmy, you proved your worth not to me, I always knew, but to yourself. You were prepared to die to try and save me." I thought about it. All that had happened would take serious time to process. Maybe therapy. "Why did he stay away?" he asked. "What?" Of all the things to say, I'd just started to feel a little better too. Bringing up Dad, the nerve of some people, angels. "Your father drank, Jimmy. He drank a lot. He couldn't stop. He couldn't control himself, and he knew it, so why did he not come home most nights? Think about it." I didn't want to. Dad was an asshole. Grandpa was an asshole. And a drunk like his son and grandson. But Grandpa came home every night. "Oh," I said, understanding finally. He stayed away. He didn't want to do what had been done to him. My whole face trembled, freeing grief so long buried. I'd hated my dad since childhood. I felt numb when he died. But he was a hero. I sobbed into the angel's chest. Whoa, slow down. Not a hero. Heroes do heroic stuff. It'd have been heroic to overcome his drinking and be there for you and his wife. But you said, He did his best, Jimmy. Everyone does their best, and it isn't heroism, it's humanity. He finally let go of my hand and backed away. Wait, where are you going? He smiled more deeply, the wrinkles framing sparkling blue eyes. He pointed up. I looked where he pointed. When I looked back to Earth, my guardian angel was gone. I didn't even know his name. What do I do now? Where are you going, Jimmy? His voice whispered in my ear with emphasis on you. That's the question you should ask yourself from this moment. Never stop asking, son, until you're there. There? You'll know you're there when you're there. What does that mean? I looked around frantically. I shouted into the cold night air. What does it mean? He'd called me son. In the movie, Clarence the Angel is a deceased human who's become an angel, trying to earn his wings through good deeds. Dad? I never got an answer on that. The angel had truly blown this popsicle stand, and I was on my own. I'd like to say I ran through the streets yelling Merry Christmas at everyone and everything, and that a horde of friends welcomed me into my own home. But I've yet to become George Bailey because he's a hero in his story, and I remain only human, imperfect, though sober, one day at a time. I apologized to Mom, gave the $400 to charity, got a real job at the local grocery store, work out a lot, got into martial arts, took a course on folklore because this mild-mannered persona is a cover, of course. For fuck's sake, did you just read this shit? Vampires are real, and angels, probably a whole lot of other evil too. So now instead of drinking, I hunt what hunts us. I set up headquarters where I met my first vampire. Merry Christmas, you wonderful old sports and bar. Today feels different. I woke up and everything seems a bit hazy. I don't remember what I did the night before. I'm walking outside and all the people I pass by don't have enough detail on them. Neither do the houses. They're like a smear on a lens, or a painting not yet finished. I don't think I've fully woken up yet. I don't quite know where I'm going. I don't exactly know where I've been either. All I know is that I have a headache. There's a constant drumbeat echoing in from someplace far away. I don't know where it comes from, but I can't escape it. I know this street, but how did I get here? There's my old house, the one I grew up in for 18 years. It's exactly as I remember it, just a little bit foggier. I think something's waiting for me in there, but perhaps I shouldn't impose. The front door opens, and there I see Penelope. My wife, she looks just as beautiful as the first time I saw her, 24 years ago. I remember it vividly. She was standing on a beach a few yards away, her hair and white sundress blowing in the wind. The sun was in my eyes, but I couldn't stop looking. She stood there smiling that same smile, and I just knew. And here we are. She hasn't changed a bit. Her smile cuts through the haze. She says I must come inside. Of course I will. And there's everyone else all gathered around. This is a surprise party. For me? Is it my birthday? There's my mom smiling at me just like in the picture above my mantel at home. Pop is here too, although I can't quite make him out. He looks a lot younger than Mom. I bet that makes her mad. I wish I had more pictures of him. My brother and sister are here as well, with their spouses and kids. It's been a while since I've seen them. We all have our own lives now, but it makes me really happy being together with them again. What are their spouses' names? I can't remember. I feel bad about that. And why don't they have faces? A pair of arms come around me from behind and interlock, and I know exactly whose they are. My little Angie, all the way from college. When she smiles, I still see that little girl who would never let us put her in pigtails. I'm so proud of her. But I have to step out. My head is killing me. The drums have been getting louder or closer, I'm not sure. I need some air, they'll understand. This is a new street. Number, I know this one too. This is where my old apartment was, before I met Penelope. That's a blast from the past. My memories feel so close to me, like fish in a pond, and I can just reach out and grab one. My old roommates Tim and Patty are here, but they also don't have their faces. I wonder what that's about. I want to ask what they've been up to, but I don't think they can answer. Oh, and there's my old boss from the restaurant I worked at in college. I wish he didn't have a face. That's one I'd feel better forgetting. What was the restaurant's name? It was something tacky, I remember that. The swing set at school. So many memories there. Were there 2 swings or 4? If it's 2, I'm not going because Drew's on the other one and he makes fun of me. Was it Drew? Who's Drew? The drums are getting louder again. I'd better get back to the party now. Don't want to worry anyone. Except people are leaving now. I guess it is getting late. I wanted to say goodbye to my brother and sister, but they didn't have faces anymore. Pop must have already gone. But my mom is still here. She's leaving too. But she stopped to give me a hug, and that made me feel better. Her hugs were the best. I almost forgot what they were like. I'm glad I didn't. Was this the last time I'd feel it? The drums are starting to slow. Just my wife and daughter now, as it always should be. I wish it could stay this way forever. I would live in this moment, my family, my life. But my daughter's cab just arrived. It's okay. She has her whole life ahead of her. She has places to be, things to see. It's okay. I'm so proud of her. She's going to be so great. My Angie, please don't go. Penelope, the love of my life, I'm so glad her face hasn't gone. I can't lose her too. She's still as breathtaking as the first day I saw her on that beach. But isn't that today? It must be today. The sun has just about gone over the horizon, and it makes the water look perfect. And there she is, standing right in front of the water in that white sundress, basking in the glow of the sunset while I bask in the glow of her. The most beautiful girl. If only I knew her name. Maybe I should ask her on a date. She's looking at me. That smile. I know it from somewhere. In fact, I think it's all I know. I'm okay with that. The drums are slowing down. I think there's only one beat left. Stay with me, I asked the girl. Always. Within the span of 30 days, my life was completely turned upside down by an unforeseen event. I should admit, had I followed the rules, this event may not have had such a terrible, life-changing ending. Regrettably, like many others in similar circumstances, I chose not to comply. It all began with a knock on my apartment door one day. Standing before me was a man dressed in a suit and tie, the epitome of a typical salesman I encountered regularly on the streets. Naturally, he introduced himself as such, which came as no surprise. However, what astounded me was the product he claimed to be selling. Life, declared the man. I'm selling life. He proved to be the most foolish salesman I had ever encountered. Who in their right mind would believe such a thing? I was on the verge of abruptly closing the door, but he prevented it from shutting completely. I'm not imposing anything, but perhaps you could spare a moment to listen, he suggested. If you're still uninterested by the time I finish speaking, I'll leave. He delivered this with an amiable smile. However, I'm confident you'll be intrigued. This product is truly one of a kind, he continued. Strangely enough, his manner of speaking managed to convince me to lend an ear. All right, go ahead. If I find myself uninterested, regardless of whether you've concluded or not, I'll slam this door shut, I informed him. The man proceeded to explain his product. According to him, he had the ability to sell me any kind of life I desired. If I grew dissatisfied with my current existence, I could purchase an entirely different life from him, one that could be drastically divergent. For instance, if I were a lonesome 9-to-5 employee discontent with my situation, I could acquire the life of a successful, carefree CEO of a major corporation. I could transition to this new life as soon as the following morning. It sounded fantastical and to some extent intriguing, but it made no logical sense. Could my life truly transform 180 degrees overnight? I questioned the process behind such a claim. Seriously, how much does that cost? I chuckled, posing the question in a jesting manner. Only $999,999 per year, sir. However, you can only purchase it with the money you possess in your current life. You cannot utilize funds from the newly acquired life, he responded. Absurd. I don't possess that kind of money, so no thank you, I exclaimed, slamming the door shut. Yet I heard his voice from the other side. We offer a 30-day free trial feature. His explanation may have seemed incredible, implausible, and utterly nonsensical, but a part of me felt intrigued, yearning to learn more. As a destitute and solitary 9-to-5 worker, my discontentment with life surpassed mere dissatisfaction. I despised it. Thus, I reopened the door and inquired further. Here's the proposition, the man elucidated. The lives we sell once belonged to individuals who have passed away. They sell their lives to us after death, in exchange for financial support for their families. I presume that is where you'd like me to begin. He initiated his explanation as I invited him to sit on my couch. You can purchase and live these lives as if they were your own, through an annual subscription fee. Naturally, since this product has no physical form, there is no way to ascertain its suitability for you, right? Hence, we offer a 30-day free trial feature. If, after the trial period, you decide our product isn't to your liking, no problem. We will reclaim it, restoring your original life without any payment required. It's completely free, he assured me. Wait a moment, a subscription? What if... I trailed off. Let's say I have enough money to pay for the subscription. But then, after a few years, I run out of funds. I can no longer afford it. What would happen to me? An excellent question, sir, the salesman replied, brimming with excitement. In such a scenario, he continued, I would pay you another visit to inform you that the life you are currently living, the life you purchased, will be reclaimed. By the following morning, you will be returned to your previous life. Don't worry, the entire process incurs no additional cost. It's completely free of charge, he added. I found it rather intriguing. All you have to do, sir, is sign your name right here, the salesman said, producing a sheet of paper and pointing at the bottom where it read customer's signature. Is there any risk? I inquired, seeking reassurance. No, sir, no risk at all. Trust me, there's no need to worry, he replied, maintaining a friendly smile. Unless, of course, you were to harm the salesman offering you the trial, namely me, he added. Why would I do that? I don't think I would kill anyone for something like this, I laughed, considering it a silly jest. Well, people differ from one another, sir. You may not, but someone else might. It's merely a precaution. Unexpected occurrences do happen, sir. Therefore, I see no harm in being prepared, he responded calmly, his amiable smile unwavering. I informed the salesman that I desired a life of wealth, handsomeness, and playboy-like charisma. I wanted to possess everything I desired, a glamorous existence perpetually surrounded by alluring women. Of course, sir, he acknowledged, jotting down my request on the paper. With a swift stroke, I affixed my signature at the bottom of the document, and shortly thereafter the salesman departed from my apartment. I will process your request promptly, and I assure you it will be ready when you awaken tomorrow morning, he declared before stepping out the door. And remember, sir, it's a 30-day trial, he reminded me as he traversed the building's corridor. After closing my apartment door, I immediately found myself contemplating, what have I done? The entire event was undeniably peculiar, yet I disregarded such thoughts. Regardless of its veracity, it was free, and thus I had nothing to lose. Or so I believed. The following morning I roused from my slumber and found myself gazing at a different-looking ceiling. Sitting up in bed, I surveyed the room I was in, realizing it was a luxurious space that clearly wasn't mine. Suddenly, the memory of the life-selling salesman flooded back to me, prompting me to leap out of bed and rush toward the mirror. To my relief, it was still my face staring back at me. I hadn't been transformed into someone else, but had I truly begun living the life I had requested? Judging by the opulent room I woke up in, it certainly seemed so. Hi, baby, are you awake? I heard a seductive and enticing voice from behind me. Turning my head, excitement surged through me as I laid eyes on two stunning women, resembling the ones I had seen in Playboy magazine, clad only in lingerie, making their way toward me. As unbelievable as it sounded, the salesman was real. He had actually sold me a new life. Later that day, I discovered that I was now the CEO of a recently IPO'd IT company. My life overflowed with wealth, desirable women, extravagant possessions, and all the glamour I had ever yearned for. It was the life I'd always dreamed of. For the next 30 days, I indulged in a captivating existence that never grew dull. Money, women, and all the things I cherished and longed for became mine. I live a luxurious life at my glamorous mansion, surrounded by alluring women gracing my bed. I go travel around the world wherever and whenever I want. I buy literally anything I wanted when I want it. Money is never an issue, not even the slightest. Neither do power, strength, influence, and anything in between. In my 36 years of living prior to this life-altering moment, nothing came close to those extraordinary 30 days. They were the most exhilarating days I had ever experienced. I even found myself wishing that the salesman would never reappear to take away this magnificent life from me. But I was mistaken. Exactly at 11:59 p.m. in the dead of night on the 30th day, I heard a ring at my door. I hadn't anticipated the salesman's return, but when I opened the door, there he stood, the salesman of life. How did you get here? There are security personnel at the gate, I exclaimed to the salesman. How I arrived shouldn't be your concern. he responded. "I'm simply here to remind you that the free trial has come to an end," he explained. "Would you like to purchase this life or revert back to your original existence?" the salesman inquired. After experiencing 30 days of the perfect, breathtaking life I had always yearned for, was I now expected to surrender it and return to my sad and pathetic old life? No, absolutely not. No way in hell. "Sure, please come in and have a seat. Explain to me how I can proceed with purchasing this life." "I genuinely adore it," I declared, welcoming the salesman and offering him a spot on the couch. "You have a truly beautiful life here," he remarked, surveying the living room. As soon as he turned his back against me, I swiftly seized the small metallic statue from the nearby shelf and struck the salesman's head with it. Blow after blow, I relentlessly attacked him, even as he fell to the ground, bleeding. "This beautiful life is mine, and I'll never give it up," I shouted as I dragged his lifeless body to the backyard and bury it there. Once I finished, I promptly cleaned myself up and ascended the stairs, joining 2 sleeping naked women on my enormous bed. This perfect and beautiful life is now mine. Forever, I shouted to myself. Ding-a-ling. Once again, I heard a ring at my door. Who the hell is that again? I thought as I walked toward the door. My security personnel should have been guarding the gate. No one should have been able to reach the door to ring the bell except for my security personnel himself. And he shouldn't have to, as he also has the key to the door. When I opened the door, I saw a man standing behind it with his back against me. As the man turned around to face me, I immediately saw the face I recognize, the face I would never expect to ever see again, the face of the salesman of life, the man I had just killed and buried in my backyard a few minutes ago. "What the fuck? No, no way, no way, no!" I screamed in horror, collapsing to the floor, and instinctively crawled my ass back inside. My jaw dropped and my eyes widened in terror. "Good evening, my good sir." He greeted me with a strange and creepy smile on his face. It can't be. I stuttered, pointing shakily at him, and then toward the backyard. "You just killed me, yes, correct," he responded with a creepy smile still on his face as if nothing had happened. "You are supposed to be there," I yelled in horror, pointing my finger again at my backyard. "I am, sir," he said, "I am." He paused for a moment before continuing. "But there are thousands of me, scattered around the globe, selling life. There's no point in trying to kill me because I'll send another me to continue where the job left off. I am here, sir, just to inform you about the procedure," the salesman began explaining himself, something he hadn't had the chance to do earlier because I struck him dead before he even could speak. "Our system is mostly automated, however it needs to be triggered by the final statement being disclosed. If you really had to kill me again, sir, I will have to send 3 guys back here. All of them, of course, being myself, in which the 2 would pin you down on the floor while the last one discloses the statement. So please, don't make this difficult for either of us, as killing me, no matter how many times, is pointless. Do I make myself clear?" The salesman stared at me in silence for a few seconds that felt like a week. I didn't say a word. "I take that as a yes," he said. "So, sir," the salesman continued his explanation, "there are 2 ways this may go. And since you already tried to kill me once, I assumed you refused to return to your original life. I am deeply apologize, sir, but you can't just get away with killing the salesman. If you think I'll just revoke you life and that's it, you're mistaken. If you think the punishment would be for me to kill you in return, again, sir, you're also mistaken. That would also be considered as getting away with murder. That's not going to happen." "What would happen to me then?" I asked out of curiosity, shivering from head to toe. "As I mentioned when I first paid you a visit, sir, you can return the life you took during the 30-day trial for free without any payment," the salesman began speaking. "Unless, of course, you killed the salesman who offered you that life. In that case, your original life, the entire life you were born into, becomes the payment. The price for such an act is that we will take away your life, the new life, that was in trial version, as well as the life you're born into. Then we will thrust you into another existence much worse than the one you had before," he explained. By worse, it could mean anything. For instance, a helpless existence where a terrible accident had happened to you and left your entire body paralyzed. The life where you're confined to a hospital bed, unable to do anything but sleep and regret everything you've done, for the rest of your life, that you and I wouldn't know for how long. The salesman continued his unsettling explanation. I couldn't imagine the life he had just explained to me to be actually happening. It was extremely horrifying to even think of. That's horrible, I muttered. Is there anything I can do to change this, whatever that means? I am deeply apologize, sir, the salesman responded. But no. The version of life I explained to you, sir, was just an example. It could be any other way. Could be worse. Can't be better. Not even slightly. You have a chance to keep this version of life you have right now, though, the salesman said again. What I just heard coming out from his mouth was something I would never expect, considering that I had killed him once. I have? For real? Yes, sir. The downgrade of your life started when you wake up from your first sleep after hearing the statement. As long as you remain awake from this moment onward, this life you have right now will remain yours. Oh, fuck you. And you expect me to stay awake for the next 20 years? The salesman laughed uncontrollably. You can try, sir, he said while trying to hold his laughter. You can try. You're not our first customer who tried to kill the salesman. It should come to no surprise to you. The salesman spoke again, tidying up his suit and tie as he blurted out word by word. The longest our previous customer tried to hold off their sleep is a month. Well, 28 days, he corrected himself. Let us all see if you can break the record and outlive our record-breaker customer. Once again, I heard the salesman laughing maniacally as he started to turn his back against me and walk toward the door. That time, I wasn't just hearing the sound of laughter of a one man. I felt like I heard the sound of countless of people laughing around me. It felt like I was being mocked and laughed at by countless of invisible people. The second that strange and creepy salesman of life walked 3 steps away from where he originally stood, I started seeing him fading and then vanished into thin air. I was left trembling. Now it has been 1.5 weeks without sleep for me since the final statement from the salesman of life. And I can't stand it anymore. I feel myself dozing off. I could fall asleep any second now. I was born and raised in a house that stood near a forest for almost my whole life. You can imagine, I've heard stories that have kept me up at night, multiple nights at a time. My father was brought up in the Algonquian lands in Michigan. The amount of stories he used to tell me are far more than I can count. My mother always scolded him for scaring me. For Christ's sake, Gerald, you'll scare the poor boy out of his wits. Clearly, he never took anything my mother told him seriously. In a way, I had always felt a connection to the forests. I always wondered as a kid what stories those trees might have seen. How many moons, suns, and sunsets have they witnessed? I would sneak out at night to sit in the treehouse that I built without the knowledge of my father because I know he would not allow for it to stand. One day when I overslept in that same treehouse, my father found it while searching for me. To say that he was livid would be an understatement. I asked him why he hated the woods so much. When you've seen what I've seen, you'll understand soon enough. I never understood the meaning behind those words. But now, as I drive my car through the Appalachian Trail, 7 years after my father had died, a part of my heart felt as if I understood the quote my father always said. I had deeply underestimated how tangibly creepy the forest was at night. The clock on my dashboard blinked 12:54 a.m. The faint blue glow was the only comfort for me other than the headlights of my car. It was pitch black outside. Not even the moonlight seemed kind enough to offer the so little a light it can offer. Trees pressed in on both sides with their skeletal limbs reaching for the road like claws. My headlights cut through the gloom, illuminating patches of cracked pavement and an occasional road sign coated in grime. The silence was the first thing that unnerved me, not the peaceful kind of quiet you'd expect in the wilderness, punctuated by crickets and rustling leaves. This silence was dense, oppressive, like a blanket smothering the world. My ears strained for any sound, but the only noise was the low hum of the engine and the occasional crack of a branch under my tires. I adjusted the rearview mirror, glancing behind me out of habit. Nothing but darkness stared back. I swore under my breath for quite some time. I wished my sister had not visited me this afternoon. She had forgotten her breast pump at my place, and given how remote the land her house is situated in, she only had one way, and that was to call me and tell me to come to her home. I had never taken this trail before. My father had spoken greatly of his heritage, but I had never paid any attention to it all the same. He had also spoken greatly of his experiences in the woods. Don't think about that, I told myself. Think about something else. I adjusted my hands to the radio. Nothing. pure static. I turned the channels, turning the knob aggressively for some form of comfort. Nothing. Static again. A flash of movement on the road ahead. My heart leapt as I slammed on the brakes, the car skidding to a halt with a screech. I swore under my breath again. What the actual? There, standing in the center of the road, was a deer. At least I thought it was a deer. It was a buck, tall and gaunt, with antlers that jutted out like twisted branches. Its ribs pressed against its fur, and its legs seemed too long, spindly, and fragile, like they might snap under its weight. The headlights cast eerie shadows across its body, and for a moment I thought it was just sick, maybe starving. But then it looked at me. Its stare pierced through my body, as if an actual human was staring at me. I gulped. The thousands of legends my father had told me came like a whirlpool into my mind, and sweat started forming in the creases in the back of my neck. The forest stayed silent still. Not a movement of a cricket nor a rustling of a leaf. Not a single breakage of a twig or stick. Its eyes didn't reflect the light like a normal animal's. They absorbed it. They were a black tunnel, I felt, pushing me deeper and deeper into it. I sat frozen, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. I was now growing more and more scared. The air conditioner within the car was not enough to mask the sweat and unbounded fear forming within my body. The deer or creature tilted its head slowly, unnaturally, as if trying to understand me. My knuckles were now turning paler than ever. I took one hand of the steering wheel and covered my mouth with it. It did not break eye contact. It just kept staring into my soul. And then it moved. Its legs jerked forward in a halting, puppet-like motion, the joints bending in ways they shouldn't. My eyes widened. You don't have to be a natural expert to know deers don't stand up like that. The creature opened its mouth, and a low, guttural clicking sound filled the air. It wasn't a sound any deer should make. Panic, fear, and outright rage surged through me, and I hit the horn. I hit it again and again. The blare echoed through the silence, but the creature didn't flinch. It tilted its head again, almost as if it was toying with me. Its spindly mouth turned into, as I watched in horror, a smile. It took another step forward. Nope, 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 I muttered, slamming the gear into reverse. But the car wouldn't start. Fuck, I yelled and plunged my legs again into the accelerator. The headlights flickered once, twice, and then the road plunged into darkness. When the lights came back on, the road was empty. The deer had vanished. My heart was pounding, a drumbeat in my chest as I pressed the accelerator and sped forward. Just a weird deer, I whispered to myself, though my mind did not agree with me at all. I shoved those thoughts deeper back in my mind. That's all it was, just a sick deer. But the knot in my stomach didn't loosen. The road stretched on, darker and narrower, the trees closing in like a tunnel. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me. Maybe something was. My hands tightened on the wheel as the car hit a pothole, the jolt rattling my teeth. A sharp crack echoed through the night. Shit! I swore again, this time not a whisper but loud. I paused. Now as the sound of my car had stopped, I noticed just how quiet the forest was. I glanced in the rearview mirror again. For a moment I thought I saw movement, something pale darting between the trees. The knot in my stomach tightened at this. I shook my head. Keep it together, I muttered. You're just tired. From fear, my legs now were equivalent to lead. But then it happened again. This time I was sure of it. A shape, pale and long-limbed, slipping through the trees just at the edge of the headlight's reach. The car suddenly felt like a fragile bubble, a thin shield against the encroaching darkness and the ever-approaching dread that was the forest. I pressed the accelerator harder, the engine growling as the car got out of the pothole and finally sped up. I prayed to God to save me. I wished all this would just end as quickly as possible. But no matter how fast I went, the thing in the woods kept pace. I could see it now, flickering in and out of view, darting between the trees with unnatural speed. My chest tightened as the road twisted and turned, the headlights sweeping across the wilderness. Every curve revealed more shadows, and every shadow felt alive. Even the branches appeared as if they were watching me. And then the engine sputtered. No, I muttered, my voice trembling as I slammed the gas pedal. The car lurched forward before stalling completely. The headlights dimmed and the silence returned, heavier than before. I fumbled with the key, twisting it in the ignition. The engine groaned but refused to start. And then I heard it. The clicking sound, that guttural sound that deer, or whatever it was, had made. It started faint, a rhythmic, bone-chilling noise that grew louder with every passing second. It was coming from the woods, circling the car, closing in. My breathing was shallow as I peered out the window, the darkness pressing against the glass. My breath had fogged the window. And then I saw it. The creature stepped into the beam of the dying headlights. My breathing became faster as it walked on its hind legs. Its body contorted and stretched, the thin fur barely clinging to its frame. The antlers jutted out at unnatural angles, and its eyes, those hollow black pits, seemed to pierce through me. It opened its mouth, and the clicking sound turned into a low, guttural growl. My hands shook as I turned the key again, desperate. The engine roared to life, and I slammed the gas pedal. The car jolted forward, the tires spinning on loose gravel before catching traction. The creature lunged, its bony hand slapping against the rear window with a sickening thud. "Oh my fucking God," I swore loudly, but did not stop. I lunged at the accelerator. I didn't look back, I couldn't. My only focus was the road ahead, the beam of the headlights cutting through the oppressive darkness. The clicking sound faded, but the feeling of being watched never left. I drove like a madman, my heart pounding, my hands slick with sweat. When I finally reached the edge of the forest and the distant glow of my sister's house came into view, I almost cried with relief. I didn't tell my sister what had happened. I couldn't. How could I explain something even I didn't understand? But as I took the breast pump out of the trunk, I noticed something. A scratch deep and jagged running the length of the car's rear window, and in the dirt on the back windshield, scrawled with one bony finger, was a single word: mine. Even now, weeks later, I can't shake the feeling that something followed me out of those woods. At night, I hear faint clicking sounds outside my window, and the shadows seem to move when I'm not looking. I made a mental route to myself to never invite my sister over again. But sometimes I dream of those hollow eyes staring at me from the darkness, and I know it's still out there, waiting. I'm the third. Alex the parrot was the second. A man named Carl Schuster, who lived in Berlin in the early 1900s, was likely the first. In total, only 3 individuals are known to have overcome the natural cognitive limits of their species' brains. Alex did no harm. Mr. Schuster, I'm afraid, may have inadvertently damaged reality. My transgression may be humanity's undoing. I didn't want to hurt anyone. I just wanted to be like Alex. What made Alex special? He is the only animal to have asked a question. Lots of animals communicate. Whales and birds sing their songs to each other. Coyotes use barks and howls for identification. We've been teaching primates sign language since the 1960s. But these animal tweets and howls and signs aren't language. There's no grammatical structure. No deep concepts conveyed. Just surface-level stuff. I'm here, they say. I'm threatened, or breed with me. Animals manage to transmit information and even desires through their species' form of communication. But none of the thousands of animals observed by science have ever asked a question, except Alex. Alex was an ordinary gray parrot, purchased at a pet store by a researcher studying animal psychology. Alex was taught to identify shapes and objects and to speak the name of the items he was quizzed on. One day, while being taught to identify different colors, Alex turned to a mirror and asked, "What color is Alex?" This is the only known case of an animal asking a question. Even the famous gorilla, who liked to pose for pictures with his kitten, and the chimpanzee raised as a human child, never managed to ask a question. As you cuddle up on the couch with Mr. Snugglekins the cat, or make Mr. Woof Woof the dog beg for treats, think about what it must be like to have an animal mind. Animals' brains cannot even conceive of the idea of asking a question. They can wonder things. When's dinner? Is this new person a threat? But the notion of using communication to get answers is beyond their capacity. The gulf between us and our beloved animals is truly vast. Now let's take the next logical step. Is there a mind? Can there be such a mind, that is to ours like ours are to animals? What thoughts are permitted by the laws of physics but are unattainable to the limited machinery of our brains? What if we could improve our own cognitive infrastructure, so our own minds could grasp these currently unattainable ideas? What lies beyond the ability to ask questions? Hyper questions. What are they like? What is their purpose? Is there hyper love, hyper joy? What accomplishments lie beyond our grasp? I used to believe that these ideas amounted to only pointless philosophical wondering. Just stuff to talk about while you're passing the joint around. Then I learned about Alex, who somehow broke past the cognitive limit of animal thought. If Alex can do it, maybe it's possible for a human to do it. Maybe, I thought, I can do it. Unfortunately, it is possible for a human to do it. And unfortunately, I did. In 2015, dozens of social media users posted images of a confused-looking elderly man slowly driving in circles in a Walmart parking lot. The emblem on the back of the car said he was driving Toyota Reno. Toyota denies that a vehicle called a Toyota Reno ever existed, even as a prototype. I'm not the first researcher to set off on a project to improve human cognition. The eugenicists whose work flourished at the dawn of the 20th century may have been the first people to search for ways to adjust to the human mind. Of course, they had their own spin on the endeavor that, let's just say, didn't age well. Take a look at this, an excerpt from the Proceedings of the Third Berlin Conference on Eugenics, 1904, translated from the original German by me. The session on Friday afternoon was opened by Mr. Gerhard van Wagenen, who presented the report of the Berlin Directed Intelligence Improvement Society. If we are to develop ways of improving the overall intelligence of the human breed, Mr. van Wagenen argued, we must have, as a guidepost, the ultimate limit of human intelligence. Only when we know this limit can we pose the fundamental question of our effort. Are we to use selective breeding to improve average human intellectual fitness in a population? Or are we to find ways of advancing the limit of human genius itself into areas that no individuals born to date have occupied? Our immediate research goal was therefore to find individuals for whom the light of genius burned, not just at all, but brighter than the lights of all others of that intellectual rank. We sought to find the one individual currently alive who can look down on literally all the rest as his intellectual inferiors. It is known that in the mass of men belonging to the superior classes there is found a small number who are characterized by inferior qualities. And in the mass of men forming the inferior classes, one can find specimens possessing superior characteristics. Therefore, we shall search wherever those of superior intellect may be found, without regard to their current station. Inferior classes, intellectual rank, try putting that in a research grant proposal today. Mr. van Wagenen and his assistants set out across Berlin and asked thousands of people a single question. Of all the men you know who are still alive, who amongst them is the most intelligent? They carefully reviewed the resulting list of thousands of names. They removed the duplicates in any female names that ended up on the list. Those crazy eugenicists, right? They tracked down each of these men who ranked as the smartest known by at least one male resident of Berlin, and asked them the same question, generating a second stage list, the most intelligent people known to a group of individuals already considered very intelligent. And they kept going. They generated the third stage names, found those people and had them produce a list of fourth stage names, and so on. This project took a year. There was a running joke in Berlin that Mr. van Wagenen would only stop when the last name on the list was his own. But to Mr. van Wagenen's credit, he did not rig the study to identify himself or one of his patrons as the one individual who can look down on literally all the rest as his intellectual inferiors. Indeed, Mr. van Wagenen eventually concluded that his year-long study was a failure. A fraction of the people named, about 8%, simply could not be found. We were appalled to note that a small percentage of the respondents identified themselves as the most intelligent man they knew. While the ultimate individual we seek could only truthfully answer with his own name, we took these first and second stage self-identifiers to be adverse to our research and ignored their input. In a few hundred cases, pairs of individuals each identified the other. In smaller numbers, we found sets of 3, 4, and even 5 men whose linkages formed closed loops of co-admiration, eventually working around back to the first man. But the most striking feature of the data was that over 3,000 lines of reported superior intelligence ended in the same name, Carl Schuster. Mr. Schuster had been a successful industrialist before suddenly retreating from public view later in life. Strangely, when we tried to find Mr. Schuster, we learned that he had, of his own volition, taken residence in the mental asylum located at Lankwitz. He refused to see us when we paid a visit to his private room in the asylum. The only communication we had from him was a note related to us by the Lankwitz staff, in which Mr. Schuster wrote, "I've spent most of my life hiding from it. I have isolated myself here, with the notion that the confused noise of mental anguish that surrounds me would act as a form of concealment. I did not suspect I might one day be discovered by ordinary men. Please do not visit me here again." From his note and the fact of his residence within the asylum, we must conclude Mr. Schuster had become a mental defective. Even more damaging to our research, we subsequently learned that Mr. Schuster was Jewish. This finding, unfortunately, invalidates our work. In the coming months, we will strive to find a protocol more suitable for investigation into the nature of superior intellect. Let's not be too hard on these anti-Semitic, white supremacist eugenicists. I'm willing to cut them some slack because I've done far, far more damage to mankind than all of these guys combined. I should have listened to Mr. Schuster's warning. I should not have let it find me. In 1954, a man arrived at Tokyo's Haneda Airport with a passport issued by the country of Taured. No such country exists or ever existed. Despite the man being detained and guarded, he mysteriously vanished overnight. Where the eugenicists look to make improvements in the human population over generations by controlling or influencing reproduction, I had a more ambitious goal, to make improvements to a specific human brain, my own, in vivo. I set out to upgrade my brain while I was using my brain to figure out how to upgrade my brain. I had astonishing success. I'm not going to tell you exactly how I did it because it's just too dangerous. I don't mean because it's dangerous to the person undergoing the process, which it is, but because doing so can lead it to notice you. I don't care if you fry your own cortex, but having it eat even more of our reality will be a calamity. The human brain consists of gray matter, which is the stuff that performs perception and cognition, and white matter, which deals with boring stuff like running your metabolism. The gray matter, your cerebral cortex, forms a nice thick layer on the outside of your brain. This layer wraps the white matter underneath. I found a way to use pluripotent stem cells to expand the thickness of my cortex. With careful dosing of the stem cell culture through a spinal tap, I created new layers of gray matter underneath my cortex. These new cells replaced the white matter that was there. For reasons I don't fully understand yet, the new cortical cells only become active when I have ingested a potent mixture of hallucinogens and antipsychotic drugs. The process is arduous and very illegal. Experimentation on humans, even if the test subject is also the researcher, is extremely highly regulated. And the drugs I need to use are not available from the suppliers that the rule-following scientific community uses. This work was performed in isolation and in secret. No regulators, no administrators, no rules, just pure scientific progress. My laboratory is as unconventional as my approach to science. I've set up shop in an assembly of 40-foot shipping containers in the center of my heavily forested 700-acre plot of land. Privacy. Thousands of people have vivid memories of news coverage from the 1980s reporting that Nelson Mandela died in prison. In the reality that most of us know, Mandela died in 2013, years after his release. Uplift number 1 to 3 cubic centimeters. By last October, after 6 months of stem cell treatment, I estimated that I had added a total of 3 cubic centimeters of gray matter to my baseline cortex volume. I could already feel the effects of the diminished volume of white matter. My sense of smell and taste were all but gone. My fine motor control was diminished. I had weakness in my legs and arms, but I had 3 cubic centimeters of fresh cortex to work with. I only needed to activate it, to uplift myself as I came to call the process of thinking with an expanded brain. I planned for the first uplift as if I was planning a scientific expedition into an uncharted jungle. I stockpiled food and water. I stockpiled lots of drugs. I bought 100 blank notebooks to record my uplifted thoughts in. I filled a 7-day pill container with hallucinogens and antipsychotics. I scratched off the Monday, Tuesday, etc. labels on the pill compartments and relabeled them. Hour 0, hour 1, and so on. I planned my first uplift to last 7 hours. Over those 7 hours, I learned how to make use of the new, extra capacity in my cortex. I filled notebook after notebook with increasingly complex thoughts. Here are a few excerpts. Hour 1. The linguistic mathematical relational resonance is far stronger than most have suspected. Hour 2. Questions lacking prepositional multipliers of context prevent full expository yet, but there is still an I in the premise. By the 5th hour, I was fully uplifted, asking hyper questions and providing my own hyper answers. What did the musings of a fully uplifted mind look like? Page after page of this. The most merciful thing in the world, I think, is the inability of the human mind to correlate all its contents. We live on a placid island of ignorance in the midst of black seas of infinity, and it was not meant that we should voyage far. The sciences, each straining in its own direction, have hitherto harmed us little. But someday, the piecing together of dissociated knowledge will open up such terrifying vistas of reality, and of our frightful position therein, that we shall either go mad from the revelation, or flee from the deadly light into the peace and safety of a new dark age. Uplift number 2, 5.5 cubic centimeters. I waited a few weeks before my next uplift. I needed time to recover from the mental strain of the first experiment, and to wait for a new dose of stem cells to produce even more gray matter. Although I only spent a few hours in an uplifted state in my first experiment, I felt diminished as I returned to baseline. Hyper questions, hyper answers, hyper joy. All of these are wonderful to experience. Life can be so much more rich and full with a post-human cognitive capacity. But as I learned during my second uplift, there is also hyper fear. I descended from my second uplift by screaming and running naked in the snowy woods outside my laboratory. As the drugs wore off, the activated sections of the new parts of my brain shut down. Thoughts that were clear one moment became foggy, like waking from a nightmare. I fell into a snowbank, breathing hard. Only a trace of what terrified me was left rattling in my tiny baseline brain. It noticed me. I occupied its attention. What was it? I knew exactly what it was moments earlier, when I had more gray matter to think with. But now I was like a dog trying to grasp the idea of a question. I was still afraid, but I couldn't understand the source of the fear. I returned to the lab and warmed up. Then I reviewed what I had written in my notebooks during the 10-hour session. Most of it was the same sort of advanced writings that my now normal brain could not comprehend. But somewhere towards the end of the session, perhaps just before I shed my clothes and ran into the woods, I wrote this. I know what Schuster was hiding from. Find out information about Schuster. When I recovered from the strain of my second uplift, I drove to town, where I was able to access the internet. I found some information about Schuster in the same archive where I found the proceedings from the 1904 eugenics conference. A short article in a Berlin newspaper described the man who had been named by so many people who took Van Wagenen's survey. Mr. Schuster, at the age of 15, had made significant contributions to machine design, metallurgy, and chemistry. He founded 4 companies which he ran nearly by himself, without a large management staff to insulate him from the workers and day-to-day engineering tasks. It seems that most of the people who identified Mr. Schuster as the most intelligent person they knew had known him well at this time in his life. Another article, written in 1905, described a strange event at his funeral. Also present was a contingent of a dozen people who claimed to have been friends with Schuster during the 5 years he spent in America. Many who had known Schuster for his entire life stated that he had never been to America, let alone spent 5 years there. Did a group of people mistakenly attend the funeral of the wrong man? Everyone in attendance had similar memories of him. All recognized his photograph on the coffin. Indeed, some of the America contingent had letters, written in Carl's hand and signed by him, fondly recalling his time spent in the New England woods. It is as if there were 2 Schusters, the one who lived his life in Germany and the other who spent years in America. Uplift number 3-6 cubic centimeters. Perhaps I've allowed my cortex to consume too much of my white matter. I now have trouble with perceptions. The woods surrounding my laboratory have been transformed into a city. Where there were trees, there are now charming stone buildings from a European city. The song of birds and the whisper of the wind in the trees is gone too, replaced with streetcars and voices speaking German. I prepared my pill container and notebooks for my third uplift as the sounds of a busting turn-of-the-century city rang through the metal walls of my laboratory. Although I had dozens of blank notebooks prepared, I only made 1 page of notes during my third uplift. I met it today. I know what it is. It is alive. Not just alive, hyper-alive. It is built into the very material that logic and mathematics is made from. The digits of the square of pi, when computed to the billionth quadrillionth place, is a sketch of a fragment of its structure. It consumes pieces of reality. It weaves them into its being and leaves the tattered shreds of logic and causality to haphazardly mend themselves. It ate the circumstances of Carl Schuster's life, leaving the ragged edges of different universes to stick and twist themselves back together, like shreds of a tattered flag tangling together in a gale. It has only begun grazing on the small corner of hyper-reality where humanity lives. Imagine a cow eating grass from a field where humanity lives like a small colony of aphids on a single blade of grass. It likes it here. It likes the taste of reality here. I tried to tell it to go away, that we are here and have a right to exist. It replied to me in its way. I found its words at the bottom of a 12-dimensional fractal, woven into the grammar of a language with an infinite alphabet. It taunted me with a question. What flavor is Alex? Update to the proceedings of the Third Berlin Conference on Eugenics, 1904. Mr. Gerhard van Wagenen provided the committee with an update on his finding that the individual Mr. Carl Schuster was strikingly well represented in the responses of his survey on intelligent men. Mr. van Wagenen writes, upon further reflection of the results of my survey, I returned to Lankwitz again to try to meet with Mr. Schuster. I arrived to find his ward in an uproar, as only a few minutes prior to my arrival Mr. Schuster had been found missing. The preceding letter, which is reprinted here in its entirety, was found in Mr. Schuster's room. While the letter does not indicate where he went, or even how he managed to slip away from the asylum unnoticed, it does show the extent of his derangement. His detailed descriptions of question-asking birds, strange events from the future, and even methods of biological manipulation unknown to science are not the product of a mind that we wish to recreate. Perhaps intelligence, as a phenomenon of nature, is more complicated than we are able to appreciate with our current notions of science. If I may speculate even further, perhaps intelligence is a phenomenon we should avoid study of, lest we learn things about ourselves that it is best not to know. They say the worst things happen when you least expect them, and maybe that's why they hit so hard, because you're not braced for the impact. I wasn't. None of us were. It was just a normal Saturday night. Dinner was over and the dishwasher hummed softly in the kitchen. I was on the couch half listening to a news segment about a gas leak downtown, scrolling through my phone while the kids bickered over which show to watch. Come on, Danny. We watched your show last night. Amy, my 12-year-old, was clutching the remote like it was a lifeline. Her 10-year-old brother, Danny, was just as stubborn, yanking at the other end. He was thrashing about like a dog. That was 2 nights ago, he shot back. It's my turn. Guys, I called, not looking up, figure it out or I'm picking. That was all it took. Both of them groaned in unison and plopped onto the couch, suddenly united in their fear of my choice of content. In the kitchen, my wife, Sarah, was pouring herself a glass of wine. She leaned against the counter, watching us with a small smile. You're too soft on them, she teased, her voice warm and familiar. You know they're good kids, I said, finally looking up. Most of the time, they're half yours after all. Half mine, she repeated with a smirk. She took a sip and moved toward the table where she'd been working on her laptop all day. Papers were spread out in a mess only she could understand. Highlighted notes scattered like confetti. You still working on that proposal? I asked. Trying to, she replied. I swear if I don't get this submitted by Wednesday, I'm going to lose my mind. You won't, I said. You always pull it off. She smiled at that, and for a moment everything felt peaceful. Normal. The kids had settled on some cartoon, and their laughter filled the room, blending with the faint hum of the heater and the occasional clink of Sarah's wine glass against the table. Outside, the wind howled, rattling the windows like a restless spirit. Dad, Danny called suddenly, pulling me out of my thoughts. Yeah, bud? Do you think Santa's real? The question caught me off guard. I glanced at Sarah, who raised an eyebrow but said nothing. Why do you ask? I said carefully. He shrugged, looking unusually serious for a 10-year-old. Just, kids at school said he's not, that it's just parents pretending. Amy jumped in before I could respond. Of course he's real, you're just saying that because you didn't get an Xbox last year. I didn't want an Xbox, Danny shot back, his cheeks flushing red. Okay, I said, holding up my hands. Let's not start another war. Look, buddy, Santa's as real as you want him to be. Some people believe and some don't. It's up to you. He nodded, but I could tell he wasn't entirely satisfied. The conversation drifted after that, and the night wore on like any other. Sarah finished her work. The kids eventually started napping on the couch, and I stayed up a little longer, scrolling aimlessly through my phone. It was just after midnight when I heard it. A knock at the door. At first I thought I'd imagined it. Who knocks on someone's door at midnight? It came again. 3 slow, deliberate knocks. I stood, my pulse quickening. Sarah appeared at the hallway entrance, wrapping her robe tighter around her. Who could that be? She asked, her voice low. I don't know. I said, moving toward the door. Be careful, she whispered. I peered through the peephole, but the porch light was out. All I could see was darkness. Who is it? Sarah asked again, her voice now tinged with unease. I don't see anyone, I said, unlocking the deadbolt. I opened the door. At first I thought the porch was empty. The cold night spilled into the doorway, making my breath plume in the air. Then I looked down and my heart skipped a beat. It stood there, no more than 5 feet tall, a life-sized elf, like something ripped straight from a Christmas store display. Its face was pale, painted porcelain with rosy cheeks and a frozen grin that stretched unnaturally wide. Gears and springs peeked from cracks in its stiff wooden body, ticking faintly like an old clock. Its eyes, glossy and shiny, reflected the faint light from inside our home. Who is it? Sarah called softly from behind me. I didn't answer as I stared down at the thing. It cocked its head with a series of small clicks, its movements jerky and mechanical. Hello? I called out towards the empty snowdrifts billowing around my house, hoping to hear a response from whoever left this strange toy outside. The elf straightened abruptly, its wooden limbs creaking. A guest I am, come out of the cold, it said, its voice high and sing-song like a wind-up toy's excited melody. Let me in, if I may be so bold. What the hell? I muttered, stepping back instinctively. Who's at the door? Sarah asked again, now closer, her tone sharper. I turned to her, still holding the door halfway open. I don't know, it's a doll or something. Danny and Amy appeared behind Sarah, rubbing their eyes, curiosity quickly replacing their sleepiness. A doll? Danny said, trying to peer around her. Before I could stop them, the kids pushed past and their eyes went wide. Whoa, that's creepy, Amy exclaimed, though there was a trace of fascination in her voice. Get away from it, I said, my voice more authoritative now. The elf ignored me and stepped forward, its boots clinking faintly on the wooden floor. It tilted its head again. Your hearth is warm, your home is bright, it said, its voice lilting eerily. May I sit and rest tonight? Sarah looked at me, her face pale. Is this some kind of prank? I don't know, I replied. Before we could stop it, the elf had walked past us, its movements unnervingly stilted. It made its way into the living room and climbed into the armchair by the fireplace, sitting perfectly still. Hey, I said, my uncertainty shifting to frustration. Get out. Now, if there's someone operating this toy, I'm about to break it. The elf's head swiveled toward me, its eyes gleaming. Oh, my dear host, don't be so unkind, it sang, the rhythm of its voice discordant. You'll enjoy what I have in mind. Without thinking, I stepped forward and grabbed its thin wooden arm, yanking hard. The texture was smooth, cold, and unyielding. The elf didn't budge. I said, get out, I shouted, my voice shaking. I tried pulling it up from the chair, but its body twisted with a jarring series of whirs and clanks. Before I could react, its free arm shot up faster than I thought possible, slamming into my chest. Pain radiated through my ribs as I stumbled backward, clutching at the spot where its hand had struck. My breath came in short, ragged gasps. Dad! Danny cried, running toward me, but Sarah grabbed him, holding him back. The elf stood up next to the chair. Such behavior, so unrefined, it said, shaking its head. But now the stakes are redesigned. What the hell are you talking about? I gasped, pushing myself up on trembling legs. It took a deliberate step closer, towering in its unnaturalness despite its small frame. Oh, brave you are, with strength and might, but now the stakes have taken flight. Blood for blood, my rules you break. The first game now has more at stake. What game? Sarah demanded, her voice shrill. The elf turned toward her, tilting its head with that dreadful clicking sound. The rules are simple, the stakes quite clear, it said, its sing-song voice grating. The games begin, the time is near. To lose, my friend, will cost you dear. What happens if we lose? Amy asked, her voice barely audible. The elf didn't answer at first. It just stared at her with those glassy, polished eyes. Then, with slow, deliberate movements, it raised one wooden hand and pointed at its face. Its painted features twisted and shifted with a soft click, click, click. For the first time, the mouth opened, revealing rows of jagged metal teeth. You'll see, it whispered. For a long moment, no one moved. The elf's thin mouth snapped back into place, and its unblinking eyes scanned each of us, the faint clicking and ticking inside its frame breaking the oppressive silence. What the hell do you mean, rules? I said finally, my voice trembling despite my effort to sound firm. The elf tilted its head in that unnatural way, its body creaking like an old door hinge. Rules are simple, don't you see? Play my games and play with glee. But lose, my friends, and you shall pay. A piece of you shall go away. What does that even mean? Sarah snapped, her fear turning into desperation. What do you want from us? The elf chuckled, a grinding metallic sound. I've traveled far on this cold, dark night to share my games and my delight. You'll play, you'll laugh, you'll surely scream. It's all just part of my grand scheme. I'm calling the cops, I said, reaching for my phone. No! The elf shrieked suddenly, its voice sharper than before. The noise sent a chill down my spine as the lights in the room flickered. The air felt heavy, suffocating. No calls, no cheats, no way to flee. Sit back down and play with me. The phone in my hand went dark. I tried turning it back on, but it was dead, completely unresponsive. Sarah checked hers too, shaking her head in panic. We can't do this, she whispered, her voice cracking. We can't just play along with this thing. I don't think we have a choice, I murmured, glancing at the kids. Danny was clinging to Amy, both of them pale and trembling. The elf clapped its wooden hands together. A hollow thunk, thunk, thunk. The first game's one you know quite well. It's hide and seek. Oh, won't this be swell? Hide and seek? Danny repeated. Indeed, the elf said gleefully, spinning its head around in a full circle with a sickening click, click, click. The children hide and you two seek. Don't take too long or you'll feel weak. What happens if we don't find them in time? I asked, dreading the answer. The elf's mouth jittered and snapped. Should the little ones remain unfound, the cost will surely be profound. I wanted to argue, to fight back, but the heavy weight of dread kept me frozen. Sarah grabbed my arm, her eyes pleading. We'll find them, she whispered. We have to. The elf clapped again and the lights flickered. Tick-tock, tick-tock, children run and hide. The game begins when you've both complied. The lights fully plunged into darkness. By the time they returned, the children were gone. Start counting, the elf commanded, its voice booming and mechanical. Sarah and I exchanged a glance before reluctantly turning to face the wall. I counted aloud, each number feeling heavier than the last. 10, I finished, turning around. The elf was gone, but its faint ticking sound echoed throughout the house. Split up, I told Sarah. We'll check every corner. She nodded, her face pale, and we began searching. I tore through the living room, the kitchen, and the pantry, calling Danny and Amy's names. Sarah rushed upstairs, her footsteps frantic. Danny! Amy! I shouted, my voice echoing down the empty halls. The house felt colder now, as if the air itself had turned against us. Then I heard it. The soft, rhythmic ticking, growing louder. Sarah, I called, did you find them? No! She yelled back from upstairs. Keep looking. The ticking grew closer, and I turned toward the hallway. The elf emerged from the shadows, its painted grin directed towards me. Time is ticking, oh so fast, it said, swaying slightly as it walked. If they're not found, this moment's their last. You sick bastard, I hissed, running toward the bedrooms. I found Amy first, curled up under her bed. I got you, I said, pulling her out and holding her close. Stay with me, okay? Where's Danny? She whispered, her voice shaking. I'm going to find him, I promised, though fear clawed at my chest. Sarah came rushing down the staircase, her face stricken. I can't find him, she said. I looked everywhere. The elf's laughter rang out, sharp and grating. The boy is lost, it seems to me. Oh, such a shame, it fills me with glee. No, I shouted, running past Sarah and tearing through every room. Danny, where are you? The ticking grew deafening, the sound burrowing into my skull. I burst into the basement, my chest heaving, and there he was, huddled in the corner, tears streaming down his face. I found you, I cried, running toward him. But it was too late. The elf appeared behind me, moving impossibly fast. Its wooden hand clamped over my shoulder and it shoved me aside. Too slow, it sang, dragging Danny to his feet. The boy screamed, kicking and thrashing, but the elf's grip was unrelenting. Stop, Sarah cried, rushing down the stairs. The elf opened its mouth, revealing those jagged metallic teeth. With a sickening crunch, it bit down on Danny's throat. His screams turned to wet gurgles as blood poured down his chest. I lunged at the elf, but it shoved me back with ease. Then in one swift motion, it tore something from Danny's neck, his vocal cords glistening and red. The elf held them up, inspecting them with childlike fascination. Then it pressed them to its own throat, and the gears inside whirred to life. What joy, the elf said in Danny's voice. Sarah collapsed to the floor, sobbing uncontrollably. I stared in horror as the elf's grin chattered, blood dripping from its painted lips. It tossed Danny's body to the floor like a discarded toy. "One down," it said, its voice now a chilling blend of its own and Danny's. "Shall we play again?" Sarah knelt down, her arms wrapped tightly around Danny's lifeless body. Blood stained her robe and hands, pooling around her knees, but she didn't seem to notice. Her sobs filled the room, raw and guttural, the kind of sound you never forget. Before we knew it, all of us were in the living room. Danny was gone. The elf stood near the fireplace, its painted grin wide and unnatural. Our son's voice echoed eerily from its throat, twisted and empty. "Such fun we've had. Oh, what a delight. Now shall we play again tonight?" "No," I said hoarsely, stepping forward. My legs felt like lead, but rage and fear kept me moving. "You've done enough. Leave my family alone." The elf tilted its head, its polished eyes locking onto mine. "Enough? Oh, not at all. There's still so much to do, so many games to call. The night is young and the rules are clear. We'll play until dawn, or until none are here." "You monster," Sarah whispered, her voice trembling. She stood, her eyes filled with a fiery mix of grief and fury. "You can't keep doing this. You can't." "I can," the elf interrupted cheerfully, clapping its wooden hands together. The sound clacked like bones snapping. "And I will. The next game's here, and it's quite a treat. A guessing game. Oh, isn't that neat?" I spy with my little eye something blue. Sarah flinched at the words, but she straightened, her voice trembling but steady. "No," she said, "no more games." The elf's grin didn't falter, but the ticking sound emanating from its body grew louder, more insistent. "Refuse to play, and you'll face the cost. Tick-tock, tick-tock, your time will be lost." I reached out and grabbed Sarah's arm. "We don't have a choice," I murmured, my voice shaking. "We have to play. We'll get through this. Just focus." She glanced at me, her face pale and tear-streaked, then nodded. "Fine," she said, her voice breaking. "Fine, something blue. The vase on the table. Is it the vase?" The elf clapped its hands again, swaying side to side like a delighted child. "Oh, no, no, no. Such a bad guess. Try again or face the mess." Sarah's breathing quickened as her eyes darted around the room. "The curtains. Is it the curtains?" The elf let out an empty laugh, its head twisting sharply to one side with a click, click, click. "Wrong again. But don't despair, you've still got one more guess to spare." Amy whimpered from the corner, her small frame shaking as she clutched her knees to her chest. "Mom," she whispered, "please get it right." "I'm trying," Sarah said, her voice cracking. "I'm trying." She turned back to the elf, her hands clenched into fists. "The picture frame on the mantel, it's blue. Is it the picture frame?" The room fell deathly silent. The elf stood perfectly still, its ticking growing louder, each sound like a hammer striking metal. Then it slowly shook its head, its grin somehow widening. "Oh, so close, but not quite true," it said, stepping toward her with deliberate, jerky movements. "And now I'll take what's owed from you." Sarah stumbled back, her eyes wide with terror. "No," she whispered, shaking her head. "No, please. Please, don't." The elf moved faster than anything in its mechanical body should have allowed. In a blur of wood and gears, it grabbed Sarah by the face, its wooden fingers clamping over her temples, its fingers over her eyelids. "Stop!" I shouted, rushing forward, but the elf turned its head toward me, its glassy eyes glinting. The weight in the air grew heavy, suffocating, pinning me in place. No matter how much I strained, I couldn't move. Sarah screamed, a piercing sound that cut through the room as the elf tightened its grip. Blood began to seep from the corners of her eyes, dripping down her cheeks like crimson tears. "Please," Amy cried, her voice breaking. "Leave her alone." The elf ignored her. With a sickening pop, it pulled its hands back, holding something wet and glistening in its grasp. Sarah's eyes. Sarah curled up on the floor, her hands clawing at her face as blood poured from the empty sockets. She let out a guttural wail, her body convulsing in agony. The elf held the eyes up to the light, inspecting them with a childlike fascination. Then, with slow, deliberate movements, it pressed them into its own face. The gears inside its head whirred and clicked, and when it blinked, the eyes moved, alive yet utterly wrong. "Ah, such fine eyes," it said, its voice pleased. "They suit me well, don't you agree?" Amy ran to Sarah's side, sobbing as she tried to help her mother, who writhed on the floor, her screams echoing through the house. I could only stare, frozen in horror, as the elf turned its gaze toward me. "Shall we play again?" it asked, its painted grin stretched wide, its new eyes glinting with a sickening humanity. Sarah lay on the floor, her empty sockets weeping blood, her body trembling in silent agony. Amy knelt beside her, shaking as she pressed a dish towel to her mother's face, desperate to help in any way she could. I stood over them, powerless to do anything but watch, anger and fear knotting in my chest. The elf returned by the fireplace. "Such fun we've had," it said in its sing-song tone, tilting its head. "But there's more to play, let's not delay." "No more," I said, my voice raw. The elf twitched, its head jerking unnaturally as the ticking in its body grew louder. "No more?" "No more?" It giggled, the sound sharp and grating. "Oh no, my dear, we're far from done. The next game is a classic one." It clapped its wooden hands together, and out of nowhere, 4 chairs slid into the living room, their legs scraping the floor as if moved by invisible hands. They arranged themselves in a tight circle in the center of the room. "Musical chairs," the elf exclaimed, spinning in place with a creak of its wooden joints. "A game of luck, a game of speed, a game that takes all that I need." Amy's head snapped up, her tear-streaked face filled with fear. "Dad, we can't do this," she whispered, her voice trembling. The elf's grin widened. Come now, take your place. The music starts and begins the race." I hesitated, my gaze shifting between Amy and Sarah, who lay too weak to move. Guilt twisted in my stomach, but I stood and pulled Amy to her feet. "Stay close to me," I told her, trying to keep my voice steady. "I'm not letting you lose." We took our places in 2 of the chairs, and the elf perched itself on a third, its movements stiff and unnatural. The 4th chair remained empty, a silent reminder of the stakes. "Let the game begin," the elf sang. From somewhere unseen, a warped melody began to play, a haunting, distorted version of a music box tune. The notes twisted and grated. The elf rose first, moving with jerky grace as it began circling the chairs. Amy and I followed, our steps slow and hesitant as we moved in time with the eerie music. The tune sped up, the tempo rising, and my heart raced to match. The elf spun and swayed, its glassy eyes locked on Amy with unsettling intensity. I tightened my grip on her hand, silently urging her to stay focused. Then the music stopped. Amy and I lunged for the chairs. I managed to push her into one just as I dropped into the seat beside her. The elf stood still, its head twisting toward the empty chair. "Ah," it said softly. "No loser appears." The empty chair groaned, its wooden frame folding in on itself until it vanished into nothingness. "Round 2, the elf said, its voice gleeful. The music started again, faster this time. Amy and I were on our feet before the first note finished, circling the 3 remaining chairs. The elf moved ahead of us, its limbs twitching in rhythm with the warped melody. When the music stopped, I threw myself into a chair, dragging Amy with me. Relief flooded my chest as we sat down just in time. The elf remained standing. It clapped its hands slowly, mockingly, as the 3rd chair dissolved. "Oh dear," it said, its tone dripping with false sympathy. "One less chair. The end draws near." Only 2 chairs remained. My heart pounded as the music started once more, its tempo now frantic and uneven. Amy clung to my arm as we circled, her breathing ragged and panicked. When the music stopped, I pushed her toward the remaining chair without hesitation. She landed in it hard, her wide eyes meeting mine. I turned towards the other chair, but the elf was already there. It stood and approached me, its wooden hands clamped down on mine, its grip like a vice. "You've lost, oh what a shame," it said, its voice filled with malicious delight. "But the rules are clear in this little game." Pain shot through my arms as its wooden fingers tightened around my wrists. I screamed, struggling against its impossible strength, but it was no use. With a sickening crack, it twisted my hands at the wrists and pulled. I howled in agony as the tendons snapped and blood poured from the torn flesh. The elf held my severed hands up, inspecting them like a prize. "These will do quite nicely," it said, pressing the hands to the ends of its own wooden arms. The gears inside its body whirred and clicked as the hands fused into place. It flexed its new fingers, the motion disturbingly smooth and human. I collapsed to my knees, cradling the stumps where my hands had been. Blood soaked the floor beneath me, and the world swam in and out of focus. Amy screamed, running to my side. "Dad! Oh my God, Dad!" I tried to speak, to comfort her, but the pain was overwhelming. The elf loomed over us, its grin as wide as ever. "Ah, such fine hands," it said. flexing its stolen fingers. But the night isn't done, oh no. There's still one more game to go. Blood dripped steadily from the stumps of my wrists, pooling on the floor beneath me. My vision blurred with pain and exhaustion, and the room swayed as if it were spinning. Amy was sobbing beside me, her small hands gripping my arm, trying to pull me upright. "Dad, please," she cried. "You have to stay awake, please." "I'm fine," I lied through clenched teeth, the searing agony making every word a struggle. I looked down at the ruined ends of my arms. Amy had quickly torn sections of my shirt off to wrap around the stumps. Crimson was already rapidly soaking through the makeshift gauze. Sarah lay slumped nearby, her body still trembling, her face a ruined mask of blood and hollow sockets. Her breathing was shallow, but at least she was alive, if barely. The elf stood across the room, flexing its new fingers, my hands now eerily human against its wooden frame. Its stolen eyes blinked at us with unsettling precision. "Ah, the time is near, the end is nigh," it sang softly, almost to itself. "One last game before we say goodbye." I felt a surge of anger despite the pain. "Why?" I rasped, my voice raw. "Why are you doing this to us?" The elf turned its head sharply, its wooden neck creaking. "Why?" it repeated, as if amused by the question. "Oh, my dear friend, it's all just play. Games and laughter to brighten the day." "This isn't laughter," Amy snapped, her voice trembling but defiant. "You're hurting us." The elf crouched low, its face level with hers, its motherly eyes unblinking. "Hurt? Oh no, child, you don't understand. I only take what's fair, what's planned. The games are simple, the rules are clear. You've played so well, no need for fear." Amy flinched but didn't look away. "We didn't have a choice," she shouted. The elf straightened, its head tilting as if considering her words. "Choice? No, that's true," it said with a soft sigh. "But the fun would vanish if you could deny." The room fell silent, save for the faint ticking that emanated from its chest. "Enough," I said, forcing myself to my knees. The room spun and Amy reached out to steady me. "Just finish this, leave us alone." The elf clapped its hands loudly, the sound echoing through the room like a gunshot. "Very well," it said cheerfully. "The final game, oh, what a delight. It's charades we'll play on this cold, dark night." A chair slid into the room once again, though this time they weren't for us. The elf took its place in it, sitting upright and eerily still. Now, it said. "Pay attention, dear friends, the rules are simple. Guess before the game ends." It stood, its movements jerky and unnatural as it began to mime. At first, its gestures were exaggerated, almost cartoonish, but as the game went on, they became more erratic, more violent. Eventually, the doll raised its hands to its throat, mimicking choking. Then it dropped to the floor, convulsing in a grotesque parody of death. Its eyes rolled back, its wooden body twisting unnaturally as it acted out its charade. Amy clutched at me, her nails digging into my arm. "What is it doing?" she whispered, her voice shaking. "Guess," the elf hissed, its voice suddenly sharp, echoing with a metallic edge. "Guess or pay the price." "Someone choking," I said hoarsely, my mind racing. "Is it choking?" The elf froze, its head snapping toward me. For a moment I thought I'd guessed correctly. Then it laughed, the sound hollow and upsetting. "Wrong," it sang. It turned toward Amy, its stolen eyes narrowing. "The child has yet to try," it said, its tone almost gleeful. "A guess, young one, or you'll surely cry." Amy's lip quivered, her small frame trembling. I don't know," she stammered. "Try," it urged her, its voice insistent. "I don't know," she cried, tears streaming down her face. The elf's grin widened, its painted mouth stretching impossibly far. "Then the cost is mine to take," it said softly, stepping toward her. "No!" I shouted, lunging forward. But the pain in my arm sent me crashing to the floor. The doll loomed over Amy, its wooden hands gripping her jaw with surprising gentleness. She screamed, struggling, but its strength was unrelenting. "Such lovely teeth," it murmured. "They'll fit just right." Amy's cries turned to muffled shrieks as it forced her mouth open. With a sickening crunch, it began pulling her teeth free, one by one. Blood poured from her mouth as the elf worked methodically, each tooth dropping into its wooden palm with a soft clink. I screamed for it to stop, dragging myself toward her, but it was over before I could reach them. "Perfect," it said, its voice now layered. "Simply perfect." When it was done, the elf stepped back, holding a handful of bloodied teeth. Amy collapsed to the floor, her hands covering her mouth as blood poured between her fingers. "Such lovely teeth," the elf said, pressing them into its own mouth. Its grin widened as the teeth fused into place, gleaming red and white. Oh, how they shine, how they gleam. Amy collapsed to the floor, sobbing and choking on blood, her hands covering her ruined mouth. I cradled her as best I could, my body trembling with rage and despair. The doll stepped back, admiring its reflection in a nearby mirror, its stolen teeth gleaming unnervingly bright. But Amy's muffled sobs were all I could hear, her face buried in my shoulder as blood dripped steadily from her broken mouth. Her small hands clutched my shirt, trembling violently, her body racked with silent, shuddering cries. I held her as tightly as I could with what was left of my arms, the pain in my stumps flaring with every slight movement. My head spun, the air thick with the metallic scent of blood and the suffocating presence of the elf as it stood over us, its motherly eyes gleaming, its new human teeth glinting in the dim light. Oh, what fun, what joy to see, it sang, spinning on its heels. The games are done and now I'm free. I stared up at it, my vision blurred with pain and tears. Why? I croaked, my voice broken and raw. Why us? Why our family? The elf paused mid-spin, its head snapping toward me with a sharp click. Its painted smile twisted into something almost thoughtful. Your door was near, your lights were bright. A perfect place to spend the night, it said with a mock bow. No reason, no rhyme, no grudge, no plight, just luck, dear friends, on this cursed night. You're a monster, I spat, though the words felt hollow. The elf laughed, a grating, hollow sound that echoed through the room. A monster, a villain, call me what you will, your tears and pain, they've been quite the thrill. But now, my friends, my time is done. I'll leave you here to grieve what's gone. It turned toward the door, its wooden limbs creaking as it moved. Sarah lay still on the floor, barely conscious, her breaths shallow and labored. Amy clung to me, her silent sobs breaking what was left of my heart. You can't just leave, I said, my voice shaking with fury and despair. After everything you've done, you can't just walk away. The elf paused at the threshold, one wooden hand resting on the doorknob. It turned its head slowly, its glassy eyes locking onto mine. Oh, but I can, it said softly, almost gently. The night is mine, the games are played. I've no more debts and no more to trade. Farewell, dear friends, and do take care. I'll visit again, somewhere. With that, it opened the door and stepped out into the cold night. Snow swirled around its figure, but no footprints marked its path as it disappeared into the darkness. For a moment, the house was silent except for the faint sound of Amy's muffled cries. Then the tension snapped, and I let out a shuddering breath, my body slumping forward. They're gone, I whispered, though the words felt meaningless. Amy didn't respond, just buried her face deeper into my shoulder. Sarah, I called hoarsely, forcing myself to crawl toward her. Sarah, are you still with me? She let out a weak groan, her head lolling to the side. Her face was pale, streaked with blood, and her hollow sockets wept dark red tears. I can't, she whispered, her voice barely audible. Can't see, can't feel. It's over, I said, though I wasn't sure if I believed it myself. It's gone. Amy whimpered, and I turned to her, my chest tightening at the sight of her swollen, bloodied lips and her trembling frame. Her eyes were wide with terror, silently begging for comfort I didn't know how to give. We'll get help, I said, though my voice shook with uncertainty. We'll get out of here. I forced myself to my feet, my legs unsteady beneath me. Blood dripped from the stumps of my wrists, leaving a trail as I staggered toward the front door. It hung open, snow blowing in across the threshold, the frigid air biting at my skin. The night was silent. No footsteps, no ticking, no sign of the creature that had destroyed our lives. We have to move, I said, turning back to Amy. She stared at me, her face streaked with tears, and nodded weakly. Sarah, I said, kneeling beside her and gently shaking her shoulder. We need to get out of here. Can you stand? She let out a faint whimper but didn't move. Her breathing was shallow, each exhale a rasping rattle. Dad, Amy mouthed silently, tugging at my sleeve. She gestured toward the door, her fear evident even without words. I nodded, swallowing hard. I'll carry her, I said, though the thought of lifting her with my injuries made me want to collapse. With Amy's help, I managed to get Sarah into my arms. Every movement sent fresh waves of pain through my body, but I pushed forward, staggering toward the door. The snow was deep, the cold slicing through my thin clothes as we stepped outside. The quiet was oppressive, the world around us utterly still. No neighbors stirred, no lights flickered in nearby windows. It was as if the entire world had gone silent in the wake of the nightmare. We made it as far as the driveway before my legs gave out. I collapsed into the snow, Sarah slipping from my arms, and Amy knelt beside me, her face a mask of panic. "I can't," I gasped, my vision swimming. "I can't." Amy turned toward the road, her small frame shaking. She raised a trembling hand and waved desperately. Through the snowy drifts, I saw headlights. The last sound I heard before everything went quiet was Amy's soft, desperate cry. I woke up in the hospital 2 days later. The doctors told me the neighbors found us in the snow, Sarah barely alive, Amy sobbing silently by my side. They didn't believe my story. How could they? Amy hasn't spoken since that night. Sarah will never see again. And me? I have no hands to hold them with, no way to comfort them. Even this story has to be dictated. But the worst part is what it left me with. Every knock sends me into a panic. Every shadow outside the window feels oppressive. All I have to say is this: don't open your door on Christmas night. They called it the Murmuring House. It was an old house built at the end of Stevens Lane. It wasn't about the way it looked. Plain white stone walls, red brick tiles on the roof, and a beautiful garden full of flowers. It was the sounds. Every passerby talked about the same thing: the murmurs. The voices were extremely low, sometimes no louder than a whisper, but you'd always swear you heard them. Despite seeming to be in perfect condition, the house had been unoccupied for the last 7 years. The landlord had lowered the price 5 times, but nobody wanted it. Everyone had heard the stories, people losing their minds, entire families either dying or disappearing. It was enough to discourage anyone. The Millers were not one of those people. James Miller had just got himself a new job, and the family was getting pretty desperate for a home. They did not pay any attention to the stories about the house. The town gave the family a month because that was how long the victims usually lasted. Week 1. The family shrugged off the rumors. Small town tales, James told his wife Sarah as they unpacked. The son, Timmy, had greater problems, like fitting into a new school and making new friends. The worries of a spooky, haunted house seemed non-existent to the introverted boy. The house was really good for its price. 2 rooms, a study for James, and an amazing lawn. The house already had the essential furniture. The basement was off limits to the family, though. The landlord said something about unstable walls and asked them not to open it. The family happily agreed, not wanting to miss such an unbelievable offer. The house was too good, maybe the best they could find in the town. The murmurs started on the 3rd day. Sarah was the first to notice. At night, she heard a faint voice calling for her. "Sarah, honey, do you hear that?" She nudged her husband awake. "Probably just the wind outside, nothing to worry about, love," said James, half asleep. Sarah thought it made sense, but found it odd. All the windows in the room were closed. "Daddy, were you the one in the garden last night?" Timmy asked the following morning. "No, son, I was asleep. You must have heard the night guard," answered James as he prepared the breakfast. Timmy decided not to question any further, but he was sure the voice he heard in the garden belonged to his father, and it was calling his name. Week 2. By the 2nd week, everyone had experienced something strange which they couldn't explain. James would often snap out of a trance at his desk, only to find the phrase, "Can you hear us?" scrawled across his screen hundreds of times. He also received calls from unknown numbers, asking him to let us out. Sarah started finding strange, dark red spots all over the house. No matter how much she cleaned them, they would come back. While cleaning the basement, she found what appeared to be hundreds of names written on the basement walls. No matter how hard she scrubbed, she was unable in erasing any of them. The basement really was in a terrible state. The cracks and crevices made it look way older than the rest of the house. She did not want Timmy to get hurt while playing here, so she decided to lock the door once again. Timmy began speaking about a man in the basement whom he called the Ear Man. In his words, Ear Man was tall and covered in ears of all sizes. As his fascination with this Ear Man grew, he started speaking of how the figure whispered to him at night, sharing secrets about the house, and said he loved their voices. Soon, Timmy started whispering by the basement door, even drawing unsettling images of him on his bedroom wall, and spoke of his constant listening. His parents dismissed it just imagination, even when they heard voices in the basement one night. Their own voices. Week 3. The family had fallen apart. James had barricaded himself in his study, driven to the brink by the relentless whispers that seemed to seep from every crevice of the house. He thought that isolation might silence the voices, but they followed him, growing louder in his solitude. His Word documents were filled with the same word over and over again. Listen. Notebooks once filled with ideas and notes were now consumed by frantic scrawls of the same request. The walls, once painted in a cozy shade of blue, now had the phrase carved and scratched all over them. Sarah kept scrubbing and cleaning the house, even when her hands turned raw and started bleeding, mumbling something about keeping the house happy. The dark red spots were all over the house now, originating from the basement and creeping all over the walls. It seemed like the walls themselves were bleeding. The house even crawled into little Timmy's dreams. Every night he'd have the same dream. All alone, standing at the top of the stairs that led to the basement. He would hear muffled voices behind the door. The voices of Mommy and Daddy. Earman would urge him to open the door and talk about how he couldn't wait for him to meet the others. The family stopped talking to each other. They didn't need to. The house whispered everything they wanted to hear. Week 4. When the Millers stopped responding to calls and doorbells, the neighbors grew concerned and alerted the police. Upon entering the house, everything appeared untouched, as if it had been cleaned meticulously. The sharp scent of bleach and disinfectant hung in the air, too strong to ignore. But when the basement door was unlocked, a wave of putrid odor hit them like a tsunami. Inside, the decomposing bodies of James and Sarah lay sprawled on the floor. The authorities couldn't determine the cause of death. Some speculated it was something they weren't willing to share. Timmy, their son, was nowhere to be found. 9 years have passed, and still, no trace of him. The only thing left to guide the detectives was the hundreds of names, including James, Sarah, and Timmy, scrawled desperately across the basement walls. The case was never solved, just another story lost in the whispers of the house. The town moved on. Another family consumed by the house, they all said. But at night, if you ever walked on Stevens Lane passing by the house, you'd swear you heard them, James, Sarah, and Timmy, whispering and murmuring along with the past occupants. If you listen closely, you might hear your name too. Hi, my name is Lita. I'm 16 years old, and for the last month and a half, my sister Ellen has been sending me strange messages over text. The messages weren't too strange at first, just some dark jokes here and there. I didn't think too much about it at the time, but then they started becoming more and more common in Ellen's texts. She eventually started sending news articles about people just having horrific things done to them. This is when I started becoming concerned, since I didn't think it was healthy for her to be constantly reading about messed up things, and I told her so. But she just responded with, "I understand your concern, but I just find this interesting and wanted to share with you as I'm starting a true crime podcast." I was kind of weirded out by this response, but whatever, I guess she is a stay-at-home wife and could use the extra income. This week, however, the messages started to get really out of hand as Ellen started sending videos and photos of what looks to be real videos of people being killed in horrific ways. I'm going to go into detail about what the videos and photos showed for the sake of my soul and yours. I asked Ellen why the hell is she sending me these photos and videos and why the hell she was looking at them in the first place. She just responded by saying, "I don't know. Why are you upset by this?" After that message, she just kept sending more and more of these videos. I asked her to stop sending me this fucked up stuff. She didn't stop sending these videos. My only response from her would be voicemails of her laughing for minutes on end. I honestly thought she hated me or something, 'cause why else would she send me these things? Not knowing what else to do, I went to my mom and told her about this. She was reasonably freaked out and tried to get a hold of my sister, but she couldn't. So she called her husband and explained the situation to him, to which his response was, "Huh, that's weird, I'll try and talk to her about it." Safe to say, after that lackluster response, my sister kept sending me those videos and photos. At this point, my mom asked me to block her as she didn't want me seeing those videos anymore. But I couldn't block my sister. I loved her. She clearly needed help, so I convinced my mom to take me to her house so we could check on her. When we got to her house, we knocked on the door, but there was no response. We waited a few minutes before knocking again, still no response. Eventually, my mom knocked on the door while saying, "Ellen, it's me, and Lita, are you home?" We waited a few more minutes and were about to go when the door opened and Ellen was there to greet us. "Hi, guys," Ellen said meekly while looking down, clearly avoiding eye contact with us. "Sorry to leave you two hanging like that." "Don't worry about it," Mom said while embracing her as tightly as possible. Ellen led us inside and we all sat down in the living room. I expected her house to be at least a little messy, but it was clean. It was so clean that the place hardly looked like it had been lived in. At the very least, I expected Ellen to look a little rough, but she looked fine and well put together as always. "I think you know why we're here, darling," Mom said while fidgeting with her hands. "No, I don't," Ellen responded, looking genuinely confused. "The videos and photos you've been sending me, Ellen," I blurted out. "What videos?" Ellen looked even more confused. "The videos of those awful things happening to people." Ellen laughed when I said that. "Have you been watching too many scary movies, Lita?" Her voice darkened when she said that Mom chimed in, stopping Ellen from derailing the conversation. "Ellen, we're all very worried about you and we love you, but something here isn't right. You shouldn't looking, let alone sending those videos to your sister." "I have no idea what you're talking about." Ellen looked even more puzzled than before. I pulled out my phone and went to our text conversation and showed her what she'd sent me. "You honestly don't know what I'm talking about," I said, harsher than I meant to. Helen's face went pale as she scrolled through the messages. "No, I swear to God I didn't send these to you, my God, I wouldn't even look at this stuff myself." Ellen paused for a moment before continuing. "Lita, I don't know who sent you this, but I swear it wasn't me." "What do you mean, was phone number hacked or something?" Mom asked with hopeful relief in her eyes. "I guess my number was hacked and I somehow didn't know, my God. I'm sorry that you had to see all that, Lita, if I'd only known sooner." "Ellen, it's okay, it's not your fault," I said as a wave of relief came over me. Mom, Ellen, and I hugged it out and Ellen changed her phone number. We stayed for a little longer to make sure Ellen was all right. But while on the drive home, I couldn't help but think about the many inconsistencies in my sister's story of being hacked. Why didn't she hear about what was happening from her husband after my mom called him? Wouldn't she have gotten my messages of me asking her why she was sending me all these horrific things? And did those voicemails of laughing sound exactly like her? I pushed these thoughts away for the past few days as once Ellen changed her phone number, I wasn't sent another awful video or photo. Well, that is until yesterday when I was sent the message on Ellen's new phone number, "You can't stop me." Under the message was at least a dozen photos and videos of the most depraved things you can think of. Again, I don't want to say what these photos and videos showed for the sake of my soul and your soul. I don't know how I'm to stop this or if Ellen is really behind this, but I'll keep all of you updated. If you have any questions, leave in the comments and I'll try to respond to them. "You're a fucking animal, Tom." Cassandra, volatile with rage, tossed her husband's cell phone to the floor of their bedroom, intending for the device to clatter and crash melodramatically when it connected with the wood tile. It landed screen up and spun towards Tom's feet, gliding smoothly against the ground like an air hockey puck. He hastily bent over to stop his phone's forward motion, pocketing it without looking at the screen. Tom already knew what pictures would be opened on his messaging app. Instead, he went silent and did not argue, turning his head away from her and submissively placing his hands in the air. The motion was meant to represent a white flag of surrender, but more than that, it was a way of admitting guilt without asking for forgiveness. Wordlessly, he pushed past his wife to grab a pillow from his side of the bed and then paced quickly out of the room. Tom turned right as he exited, carefully stepping over a few unopened moving boxes to make his way to their new home's staircase. With a sound like rolling thunder, he stomped and pounded each foot against every step on his way up. Every petulant boom reverberated and echoed in Cassandra's mind. When Tom reached the attic, he bellowed something that was clearly meant to be a defamatory finale to his boyish tantrum, but she couldn't make out exactly what he said from where she still stood motionless in the bedroom. At that moment, any lingering regret about dosing her husband for the first time that morning with the curandero's poison evaporated from her. Remorse made steam by the molten heat of her seething anger. "If I'm an animal, you're a goddamned blood-sucking leech, Cassandra." Tom's retreat from his wife had been both unanticipated and expeditious. To that end, he could not think of a retort to her jab until he was 3 steps out of the bedroom, but he held on to the retort until he reached the safety of the attic's doorframe. He knew he could belt out his meager insult from that distance without fear of an additional counter-offensive. As soon as the words spilled from his mouth, he tumbled past the threshold into the attic and slammed the door behind him. It wasn't his fault Sheila was swooning over him, Tom smugly mused. She had volunteered those digital pin-ups of her own volition. That said, he had been actively flirting with the young secretary since the couple landed in Texas 2 months ago. Their marriage had been in a death spiral for years, in no small part due to Tom's cyclical infidelity. The cross-country move had been a last-ditch attempt at resuscitating their relationship, but of course, Maine was never the problem to begin with, so the change of scenery mended nothing. In his middle age, Tom developed a gnawing desire to feel warm-blooded and virile. Cassandra's despondency had the exact opposite effect. She made him feel undesired, sexually anemic. That night was not the first time he had called her a blood-sucking leech for that very reason. However, if Tom had been gifted the power of retrospection, he may have noticed that his wife's frigid disposition became the norm after the discovery of his second affair, not after his first. "I want something that will make him feel even a small fraction of the insanity he's put me through," Cassandra whispered to the curandero, visually scanning the entire antique store for possible interlopers or undercover police officers before she asked the purveyor of hexes standing behind the counter for anything definitive and incriminating. Multiple family members had recommended this unassuming shop on the outskirts of downtown Austin for an answer to Tom's beastliness. The apothecary grinned and asked her to wait a moment, turning to enter a back room concealed by a red silk curtain. The witch doctor was not what Cassandra expected. She couldn't have been older than 30, and she certainly did not present herself like a practitioner of black magic. No cataracts, scars, or gemstone necklaces. Instead, she sported an oversized gray turtleneck with part of a floral sundress peeking out from the bottom. She returned seconds later, tilted her body over the counter, and handed Cassandra a vial no bigger than a shot glass. Inside the vial were innumerable tiny blue crystals. They were slightly oblong and transparent, looking like the illegitimate children of rock candy and fish food. The curandero cheerily instructed Cassandra to give her husband the entire ampule's contents over the course of about 3 days. As she left the store, the shopkeeper cryptically reassured Cassandra that her husband would be thoroughly educated on his wrongdoings by the loving kiss of retribution. "Why is it so fucking cold up here?" Tom mumbled to himself, doing laps around the perimeter of his makeshift sleeping quarters in the attic. It had been approximately 3 weeks since their argument and his subsequent relocation. At first, he didn't much mind it. The Cold War between him and Cassandra was taxing, but he had his phone and Sheila's escalating solicitations to keep him company. But as of the last few days, he had begun to feel progressively unwell, feverish and malaised. Then he noticed the small lump on the underside of his left wrist. It was about the size of a dime, skin-colored, immobile, and profoundly itchy. Tom felt like he spent almost every waking minute massaging the area. The irritation then became accompanied by white-hot burning pain, gradually extending up his arm as the days passed. One night, as he scratched the area, the lump moved a centimeter closer to his palm. He paused to inspect the change, assuming the vexing cyst had finally been dislodged and neutralized. After a few seconds, however, it moved again, but in the opposite direction and without Tom's help. And then again, slightly further up his forearm. Revitalized by panic and confusion, he began clawing recklessly at the lump until the skin broke and a small black button was liberated from the wound, only to scurry away to an unseen sanctuary. Tom thought the button looked and moved like a deer tick. "Sure, Tom, come back down, but to the couch for now, okay?" Cassandra had accepted many empty apologies from Tom before, but something about this most recent one felt slightly more sincere. By this point, she had completely forgotten about the curandero and her vengeful prescription. Cassandra had gone through with slipping the contents into Tom's coffee over the course of 3 days, but that was over a month ago. At the time, she did not really believe it was black magic. She assumed it was a military-grade laxative or some other ultimately benign poison. The more she thought about Tom's behavior, however, she came to realize that she may have been mistaking a sincere apology for what was actually fear and need for comfort. Cassandra had not interacted much with Tom in the past few weeks, but now that she was, he was certainly acting off. Seemingly at random, he would slam his palm down on himself or something else in front of him, and then would be unwilling to give an explanation. He slurred his words like a drunken sailor, but as far as she could tell, he hadn't been drinking. When she looked into Tom's eyes to find that his pupils were rapidly dilating and constricting like black holes on the verge of collapse, the realization hit like a lightning strike up her spine. Cassandra remembered the vial with the blue crystals. She was at the curandero shop within the hour, catching the witch doctor right as she was locking up her store. Cassandra pleaded with her for an antidote to whatever magic or venom was now in Tom's system. In response, the shopkeeper produced another identical vial from her jacket pocket, twisted the cap off, and dropped a few of the crystals into her mouth. "It's dyed salt, my love," the curandero said, then pausing to tap out a few fragments onto the backside of Cassandra's hand as a means to corroborate her claim. "I don't sell power, just the idea of power. Whatever you made manifest, I only provided the inspiration." Confused and without clear direction, Cassandra returned home to check on her husband. Tom had never been thirstier in his entire life, but he could not drink. Every time he poured himself water, he carefully inspected it through the transparent glass, only to find it contaminated with hundreds of ticks, an entire galaxy of black stars drifting aimlessly through the liquid microcosm. Sitting at his kitchen table with his head in his hands, Tom cried out in agony, only to have his wail cut short by his vocal cords unexpectedly snapping shut. What had started as an infestation had become a plague. The gentle touch of a hand on his shoulder nearly scared him half to death, causing him to jump back off his chair and knock the infested glass off the table and onto the kitchen floor, shattering it instantly. He took a breath, seeing that it was only Cassandra, but that relief was short-lived when he looked back down to see an armada of nymphs moving on his position. He yelped and scrambled on top of a cabinet. His wife moved forward, seemingly to comfort him. When she held his hand, Cassandra noticed the open wound where that first tick had sprouted, and she rushed into the other room to procure bandages. For a moment, Tom felt safe. His wife began attending to his wound while he was still perched on the cabinet. But then he felt a pinch on his left wrist, followed by an intense lacerating sting, and then finally, the sensation of warm fluid gushing down his palm. When he looked down, his wife looked up at him in tandem. Cassandra's mouth had mutated into a pulsating arena of hooked teeth, with plasma delicately dripping from the barbs she had just used to bite into him. In one swift motion, Tom pivoted his torso, unsheathed a blade from a nearby knife block, drove it deep into the creature's abdomen, and sprinted out the house and into the street. Cassandra nearly bled out on her kitchen floor, but a neighbor heard the commotion and had called the police. She awoke in the ICU, surrounded by family. When she asked them what happened, they paused awkwardly and traded solemn expressions with each other instead of explaining. When Cassandra pressed for information, they flagged down her doctor from the hallway. The physician did not mince words with Cassandra. Tom was dead. He had been picked up by the police fleeing the neighborhood, but had been delivered to the same ICU she was currently in when he started to wheeze violently and turn blue. "Do you have any pets, dogs especially?" the doctor asked. "Where in your house do you and your husband sleep? Have you ever seen any bats in your home?" Cassandra explained that they had bought their home recently, that Tom had been sleeping alone in their attic after a particularly nasty argument, and that she had seen a bat fly out a window once when they were moving in. She then detailed her husband's odd behavior in the time leading up to her assault. The physician frowned and then elaborated on their suspicions. The dilating pupils, the hallucinations, the fear of water, and the inspiratory spasms. They all suggest that your husband contracted rabies while living in your attic. Most of the time, people in the U.S. contract the disease from a dog bite. However, bats are known to transmit the disease too. What's worse, if bats are in your home, they can bite you in your sleep without you waking up. If contracted, the disease is universally fatal and there is no known treatment. Tom died from his airway spasms. You nearly died too, from blood loss. Did you know you have an extremely rare blood type, AB negative? Only 1% of the population has this blood type, and unfortunately, the hospital has been critically low on replacement blood that is a B negative for almost a month now. We were initially very concerned. You needed more AB negative blood than we had. But as serendipity would have it, Tom was a B negative as well. Imagine that. Thankfully, rabies cannot be contracted through the blood, only through saliva. That's why it is contracted through bites. Although it was unconventional, our administration gave us the green light to give you a large portion of his blood. In essence, Tom's blood saved your life. The doctor paused, waiting patiently for whatever questions Cassandra had. But she had none. Instead, there was an eerie, uncomfortable silence for almost a minute. Then Cassandra tilted her head back, closed her eyes, wept, and had a very long laugh. I won't live to be 16. I've been stuck at this hospital bed for half a year, and at the start, the Make-A-Wish people showed up. It wasn't one of my worst days, but I couldn't stand the way she looked at me. I was dead already. She wasn't seeing me. She was seeing a ghost. Then she kept asking if I was sure, making me repeat myself. I was too tired to be mad, but needed her to stop. So I said it. I want you to cure my cancer. I should feel bad, I guess. She left my room crying, but no one came back. Later, I can't remember what day, a nurse showed up with this laptop. It's easier to use than the tablet, and it's helped a little when I can focus. Another nurse showed, or maybe the same one. It's hard to tell sometimes because of my eyes, and she asked me what I wanted Santa to bring me. I said I was too old to believe in him, but what I imagined myself saying was, I want him to kill me. I managed not to cry until she left. Crying made me so tired I fell asleep. Everything went hazy, but I kept thinking about it. In my dreams. I don't want to live like this anymore. I'm so tired. I'm tired all the time. I hurt. They drug me. I get confused. I start hurting again. It wasn't too awful when there weren't too many tubes. Now you'd trip on them if you walked into my room. I started waking up late at night, when it's just the noise of the machines and me breathing like a dying horse. He was just there one of those nights, close to the door, dressed in red. Nurse? But he didn't answer when I asked him. I just noticed some red clothes. It was too dark and my eyes too bad. I could see the little dots where his face should be and a bit of white. I fell asleep, I'm sure of it. I was holding Tabby, petting her white fur. Cats can be scary when you wake up and one is just staring at you. I need to finish this. I don't want to fall asleep again with the laptop on. I knew who he was when he got closer. He got closer every night. I could see enough last night. It was Santa. He's big, all dressed in red, and smells like piss and dirt. I could see his face. I could see his face because he was so close. I think he tried to tell me something. One of us was crying, but I couldn't tell which. I was too tired to feel surprised when I woke up this morning, still alive. But I think tonight, it has to be soon, right? My parents came around, but I couldn't keep my eyes open for long. I hope they don't come back. They make me want to cry when they look at me, when they try to talk to me. There's a little tree in a box all wrapped up in shiny paper. It's red like him. I hope it's tonight. So my girlfriend and I went skiing for Christmas, and something seriously messed up happened. We rented this little cabin up in the mountains. Total getaway vibe. Everything was fine until I noticed this dude in a full-on Santa suit skiing behind us. At first I thought it was funny, like, sure, people get into the holiday spirit, right? But this guy kept following us, not close enough to be weird, but always there, watching. Red suit alone, like he had nothing better to do. We tried to shake it off, thinking maybe it was a coincidence, but every time we moved to a different slope or trail, he was there, always hanging back, keeping his distance. I even pointed him out to my girlfriend a few times. She laughed it off, but I could tell it was getting to her too. Fast forward to that night. We're back at the cabin, totally wiped from the day, and decided to sleep by the fireplace. It was one of those cozy setups. Small place, just the two of us. I'm drifting off when I hear something on the roof. I mean, it's an old cabin, so creaks and stuff aren't uncommon, but these were heavy footsteps, like someone walking up there. Before I can even react, there's this loud thud from the chimney and something drops down. It's a freaking duffel bag, black, covered in soot. And then, boom, this white powder explodes out of it like it's snowing inside the cabin. Except it's not snow, it's coke, a lot of coke. My girlfriend freaks out, I'm coughing and choking, and then we're both high. I don't even know how it happened, but everything's spinning, and then we hear banging on the window. Santa. That same guy from the slopes, face pressed against the glass, eyes wild, grinning like a psycho. He starts screaming, "Merry Christmas," and slamming the glass. We were so out of it, just standing there, watching him until he ran off into the snow. I saw him get into a sleigh, yes, a sleigh, barely lit up with reindeer, and fly off. We thought we were hallucinating from the coke, but the next morning the bag was still there. We didn't know what to do, so we stashed it under the floorboards, figuring we'd deal with it later. But here's the thing. We used some of it before that. At first, we thought maybe it was some twisted joke like, "Merry Christmas, here's your present, motherfuckers," right? But now we're starting to realize how deep we've messed up. Since then, the news has reported about a guy dressed as Santa, involved in some major drug trafficking, and he's still on the run. It hit us hard. That bag, it wasn't a prank, and now we've used enough of it that if we go to the cops, we're screwed. If we do nothing, we're sitting ducks waiting for, like, Santa Mafia to return. I'm terrified every time I hear a car pull up or someone walking by. We're stuck here for another week, and I can't stop thinking, what happens when he realizes some of it's gone? There's no going back. We're laying low, but if he shows up before we leave and realizes we dipped into his stash, I guess we're at the top of his naughty list. I've always had experiences with the paranormal, and the same goes for my entire family, whether it's seeing, feeling, or just hearing them. However, this specific experience happened when I was 12 years old in the Philippines. My cousins and I would always stay at our grandparents' house for the summer. One night, I woke up to the sound of my aunt calling my name. I didn't answer because when I looked at the time, it was 3 a.m. Devil's Hour. I knew enough not to answer to someone calling you, especially during this time. A few seconds later, I heard her calling my name again. I still didn't answer, but this time, I decided to go check and see if she was really calling me. I got out of bed, opened the bedroom door, and stood frozen as I came face to face, only inches away from my face, with a girl that had a huge wound on her face, from her left eyebrow to her right cheek. Blood dripping all over as she opened her mouth. The smell was so bad. It smelled like death. It was nauseating. She mumbled, "Tulungan mo ako," help me, multiple times. As she said this, I realized what was happening. We were always told by the elders not to talk to ghosts, or don't help them if they asked for help because it would make the ghost follow you until they're satisfied. So I walked past her instead. I didn't bother looking behind me and went straight to my aunt's bedroom. I opened the door and saw my aunt sleeping soundly in her bed. Then I knew someone or something was playing tricks on me. I walked out of my aunt's bedroom and there was the little girl again. This time it wasn't just her. There was a younger boy next to her. They were holding hands. The boy didn't have a face and the girl mumbled the same words, except she addressed both of them, "Tulungan mo kami," help us. I looked at their feet and saw that they both had chains on each of their feet. I usually wasn't scared of ghosts as I've always seen them, so I ignored what the elders told us and talked to her. I said I was sorry and told her I'm only a kid and I can't help them. After saying that, they vanished. I felt relieved, thinking it was going to be over. It wasn't. I heard a scream from outside the house and a gut feeling made me go out the patio and check what was going on. I looked around and my eyes landed on the mango tree on our neighbor's yard. There stood a couple, one wearing a wedding dress and the other wearing a barong. They were facing me, but there was a problem. They didn't have heads. So I closed my eyes for a few seconds, and when I looked again, they were gone. I looked at the moon. It was a full moon, wondering why all of these were happening. Suddenly, a cold breeze rushed through, and I saw a bat-like creature going into view in front of the moon. I knew it was a manananggal, a half-upper body bat-like creature. I could fuck with ghosts, but not with monsters. I ran back to the house, locked the door, and made sure all the windows were closed. As I was waiting for the manananggal to pass, I felt eyes behind me. I looked, and it was the same little girl. But this time, she didn't say anything. Instead, she was just staring into my soul. I was feeling annoyed at this point, so I told her off. "I'm not scared of you. If you're the one doing all these to me, I don't care. I'm still not going to help you. So, go away," I said. She screamed, a blood-curdling scream. It was so loud. Then she was gone. I fell to my knees. I was shaking. I felt like throwing up, but I pushed myself up and went back to the bedroom. I looked at the time, 3:03 a.m. All these happened in 3 minutes. How? I don't know. I tried to go back to sleep, but I couldn't. The next morning, I asked my aunt if she remembered calling my name and asked my cousins if they heard any screaming that night. They said no. So I dropped it. To this day, I can still vividly remember what happened. I still don't know if that was a dream or if it really did happen, but it all felt so real. I never saw the little girl again, and I'm stateside now, but there are still times where I would feel eyes on me or hear random noises around my house. I just hoped the little girl or whatever the things I saw that night didn't follow me.